Director Patterson, if she'll do a roll call, please.
Thank you. Trustee Armour.
Present.
First Vice Chair Karkner.
Present.
Trustee Cram.
Present.
Trustee Garrow. Trustee Bill McPherson.
Present.
Trustee Wendy McPherson.
Here.
Trustee McAllister.
Present.
Second Vice Chair McDonald.
Present.
Chair McMillan.
Present.
Trustee Richards.
Present.
Trustee Swan.
Present.
Student Trustee Sheila Cruz.
Very much. I need a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board approve consent agenda items 3.02 to 3.03, May 27th, 2015, moved by Trustee McAllister, seconded by Trustee Richards. Votes, please. Trustee McPherson, I assume you're in favor? It's good now. Thank you very much. Are there any conflict of interest? Declaration conflict of interest? Seeing there are none, we move on to report from the Private Session Committee of the Whole, May 13th. Its Committee of the Whole meeting in the private session, May 13th, 2015. One contractual matter was discussed. No recommendations were brought forward to the board. A report from the Public Session Committee of the Whole, May 13th. There were three presentations were shared. No recommendations were brought forward to the board. So that moves us into the next item that we have on the list, and this is the Supervised Alternative Learning Program, SAL, update. I'm going to ask Superintendent of Education, Tim Mills, if he will introduce a couple of folks for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'd like to invite Principal Jeff Trasick from TR Léger, as well as Controller of Finance for TR Léger, Renee Bourget, to come to the table to assist with the presentation. It's my pleasure tonight to present to you a report on SAL, or Supervised Alternative Learning. And it's also my pleasure to provide a report. Up until this point, there has not been a report on SAL because UCDSB has not had a SAL program in place. To introduce, UCDSB is committed to providing learning opportunities for all means all, but we also recognize that some students require alternative learning opportunities to increase achievement and the ultimate goal to get an OSSD or an Ontario Secondary School graduation diploma. For SAL, students aged 14 to 17 that are having difficulty succeeding in the regular program may be offered alternative programs under the Education Act, which is Regulation 37410, supervised alternative learning and other excusals for attendance at school. This also works very well with the renewed goals, Achieving Excellence document, which are achieving excellence, ensuring equity, promoting well-being, and enhancing public confidence. We believe that a successful SAL program, including the implementation and sustainability, is important as we strive to achieve these renewed goals through the Achieving Excellence document. A little background on the timelines. Almost 10 years ago, 2006, Learning to 18 through Bill 52 was introduced to the Ministry of Education. So we were required to provide for students, and students were required to stay in school until 18 years of age. In 2011, I'll talk about this later along with Principal Trasick, the government introduced the Education Act Regulation 374, which I noted earlier, to meet a need where there was a gap for students 14 to 17 that were not attending regular school, perhaps not even attending alternative school. So SAL was an option. And as I noted earlier, until this time, until February, we did not have a SAL program in Upper Canada. We have delivered SAL through TR Léger School of Adult, Alternative, and Continuing Ed. It's important to note that no additional cost was incurred as we used existing staff to implement and continue to deliver the program. When the staff, in conjunction with special services counselors at TR, identified students that may require an alternative learning plan, they were looking at a number of factors. One would be family, which might include lack of parental support. A student might be a parent themselves and they can't attend school on a regular basis. Could be for economic reasons. A student might be living independently, having to work to support themselves or young children. Could be personal problems, behavior, mental health, substance abuse, medical problems. And lastly, the school experience. The student just may not be succeeding academically or has been absent for an extended time and may be finding re-entry back into school to be difficult. So the intention of SAL for a very small segment of the student population, and only when other measures to help a young person remain in school are not effective. We're trying to re-engage students aged 14 to 17 that have significant attendance issues, to offer retention strategies, after everything else has essentially failed. Students excused from full-time attendance by a SAL committee participate in one or more approved activities, and this is important, credit or non-credit courses, training, employment, volunteering, counseling, or other approved activities. Students follow a learning plan and are monitored regularly, so it is quite flexible. The goals of SAL: to maintain a connection to learning and support by a caring adult, continued progress to graduation or other educational and personal goals, and to offer a program that is in the student's best interests and supports the student in meeting his or her goals. The purpose: I've mentioned earlier the struggles that the profile of a typical SAL student has, and we want to work towards getting them back into either the alternative school at TR or the regular stream to obtain an OSSD. And then to proceed to potentially post-secondary. Before I turn it over to Principal Trasick, I'd like to note that we did use TR Léger, existing staff with TR Léger, to identify students and to put a plan in place for individual students as well as monitor the students. Because it just started in February, we do not have concrete data in terms of the success, but we will report that back to you. Also, Principal Trasick will go over the procedure in terms of identifying the students, putting a SAL program in place, and ultimately following up.
Thank you, Superintendent Mills. So the Ministry of Education SAL Policy and Implementation document indicates that students registered in an alternative education program already and consists of full-time instruction do not need to go through the SAL process. So currently, all the students registered in the SAL program are full-time students with the TR Léger School of Adult, Alternative, and Continuing Education. It's important to note the funding for SAL. SAL pupils recorded as full-time have to, on average, at least have 70 minutes of classroom instruction per school day. And an example, of course, is one course per semester. We didn't pursue co-op as much, but we do have them coming into an alternative site and working on at least one credit. SAL pupils recorded as half-time. They're averaging less than 70 minutes of classroom instruction per school day. And if they're taking a continuing education or independent study, then the board receives the half-time plus applicable funding. So I guess this is kind of interesting, and this is where we're at. This is the state of SAL right now. As of March 31st, which is the count date, and Sierra Leone follows that quite heavily, we had 28 full-time students. On May 15th, we now have 44 full-time students. Our belief is that students in SAL would not have been included in the UCDSB ministry report as of March 31st if the program had not been introduced in February 2015. I don't know if this is the proper time or not, but we do have examples of students. We have examples of students that have been quite successful under the SAL program. If I could just refer to my phone, and I just received an email today from one of the people that make regular monthly contact with the students. And she gave me 3 examples of students who have been successful. One is a 17-year-old female with severe anxiety. She's being treated by her physician, but it's been difficult to find the right medication, so she had a difficult time getting into school on a regular basis. She began the SAL program in March 2015 and has found it to be the right fit for her. She works diligently on her courses from home, comes in every Friday to drop off her work and touch base with her teachers. And at the same time, her regular contact is our CYW out of that campus, so it works out quite well. Her marks have improved, and her self-esteem has increased in the last few months because she is seeing success. A second student has been he's a 15-year-old male, anxiety issues. Attendance was a problem, and he wasn't getting much work completed. His lesson production has increased from home the last few weeks. He hopes to have 4 credits by the end of June, and his regular contact with the CYW as a caring adult has worked quite well. There seems to be a lot of pressure off from home as well as the school to maintain regular attendance, and I guess the pressures of continuing with the work. And I guess the only other one that I'd like to give you an example of that fits it really well for the SAL program is we have a 17-year-old female student that's expecting a child on June 20th. And of course, you know, battling a teenage pregnancy as well as many of the health issues she might be having, it's worked out quite well. It's taken a lot of the stress of having to go to school every day on a regular basis. The contact has been made on a monthly basis. She still comes in. We basically build her learning plan to meet her needs. So I believe she's coming in every second week. And so far, those are 3 of the success stories that we've seen out of the 44 full-time students. That's not to say we haven't experienced some negative aspects of it, but those are 3 success stories that we'd like to brag about. Thank you, Mr. Mills.
Just in conclusion, senior administration will review the success to date with SAL and the opportunities that the SAL program provides for students. Principal Trasek identified the success stories for students that already were in alternative learning through TR, but were not attending and essentially would have been off the rolls and not monitored at all by staff. The TR Leger review, which you will hear later this evening, will assist in determining next steps and the full rollout and establishment and sustainability of SAL that best meets the needs of UCDSB students. And a comprehensive board procedure for SAL will be put in place for 2015-16. It was a real opportunity for us and a pleasure with the TR Leger team to identify students that were not attending, to try to re-engage them in the learning process and make a difference in their learning and ultimately getting back and obtaining an OSSD and being successful in life. So, lastly, there are some links there, which the first one is the actual policy document through the Ministry of Education. The next one there is the memorandum, and I've also included the Achieving Excellence document, which I noted at the introduction of the SAL presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Trustee Joe McAllister.
I want to predicate my questions by saying that I fully support the supervised alternative learning and the whole concept of TR Leisure. But I have some serious concerns here. Can someone answer me as to why we have not had a SAL committee as dictated by the legislation before now? Or we still don't have one?
Through you, Mr. Chair. To this point, we were using different ways through TR Leger, alternative ed, to meet the needs of students.
Supplementary? Okay. You say here in slide number 8, it is, I think, that all of the students registered in the SAL program are full-time students with TR Leger school. And yet we have 28 full-time and 44 full-time. I don't get that.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. That's a good question, Trustee McAllister. The 28 full-time students were identified that they were not attending on a regular basis and were required that if they are off for 15 consecutive days and not attending, that we would have had to take them off the roll. So SAL was used as an alternative, that they would not have to attend on a full-time basis, and we could provide an alternative program, engaging the student, but also being able to get funding as well. So we're re-engaging the student and also getting funding. On top of that, we were able to use existing staff to do that.
I have more, but I'll take my turn.
Sure you do. Trustee McPherson.
Two questions, through the chair. I've been around a long time, and previously we had a SALUP committee, which I sat in a few meetings because the trustee presence was required for a program to be set up. I'm assuming that SALUP is now history, and SAL, I hate acronyms, SAL is now taking over from SALUP. So SALUP is gone. Okay, and you will develop the procedure because, as pointed out, we have a committee, but it didn't get much exercise. My next question has more to do with logistics. The Board of Education is allowed to carry a student on its rolls until they're 21. Am I correct in assuming that? Okay. Why is it this program only targets 14 to 17-year-olds? Is there not the same value in capturing a 19-year-old that is disengaged from the community or from the school community and essentially reeling them back in under this program? Or can they not qualify for SAL?
Through you, Chair. The SAL program is targeted at 14 to 17-year-olds. What I would say, how we re-engage the students older than 18 is through the PLAR process. PLAR process is where a mature student older than 18 who's been out of a mainstream school for more than a year can basically challenge their prior learning experience and get up to 26 credits for their experiences. So there is a void in the 18-year age. They really are trying to engage the 14 to 17-year-olds to stay in contact, trying to re-engage them, trying to make monthly contact with those students. Some other boards are looking at having almost a pre-PLAR year when they're 18 to prepare them for more academic rigor than they may have been from 14 to 17. And then we usually get them into the PLAR process where they can get to 26 credits and then get 4 more to graduate.
One more question. Thank you. SALUP, from my experience, was very much a community partnership. Essentially, it was a very intense co-op placement. This appears to be more academic. Is there going to be a co-op element to this? In other words, if you've got a student that's absolutely disengaged from school, but you can get them into a work placement.
Through you, Chair. Yes, there is. I guess I would say we're hopeful that we can build on more co-op experiences. As it says, they can work on credit or non-credit, training, employment. I guess through the pilot, perhaps I was overzealous. I really wanted to get the pilot going because I believe there was a need for the program. But certainly the co-op is an experience that we'll be looking at further. And bear in mind that we have to build to the specific students' academic needs, so we'll certainly look at that as an opportunity.
Okay. Thank you.
Could I just add through you, Chair?
So, go ahead.
Also, the committee is required to have a representation from the community. And what we envision is having a community representation in different parts of the board where we could engage students within their own communities, whether it's co-op, work placement, volunteering, etc.
Thank you. Trustee Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I have several questions, so I'll ask some of them and then I will defer to somebody else and come back. Slide number 9, funding for SAL. There is a section in there where you are allowed to get funding for half-time students. Yet, any of our students that are supposedly in SAL right now need to be full-time to be at TR Leger. Do we have anything in place for students who can't take full-time placement?
Hi. Through you, Chair. I would say many of our students at TR Leger begin as a part-time student, as a full-time student, but through the 50 consecutive periods that the ministry instituted, I believe last year, we do have part-time students. So I guess moving forward, we would certainly look at the part-time, half-time students. There'd be no problem. If that meets their students' needs, that's fine with us.
Okay. Supplemental question? If TR Leger was to alter its requirements for entry, how would that affect the SAL students that are currently there?
Through you, Chair. I'll answer it in two parts. First, for the students that are already enrolled at TR Leger, and we have a plan in place and they're meeting with success, we would, I believe, have to make some exception there. For students that are not already enrolled in TR Leger, SAL can be offered through the regular high school that they're attending.
The 43 students, or 44 students, I guess now, are they tracked separately through TR Leger, or are they tracked through another process?
Through you, Chair. Typically, currently those 44 students have all been registered as TR Leger students. We are tracking the SAL students. It's a ministry requirement that we track all the students and where they are and document the monthly or the regular visits that we have. So currently all 44 are students of TR Leger, but we are tracking them as SAL students.
I'll come back to you. Trustee McAllister.
Okay, we have, would I be right in saying that there are about 1,000 students in TR Leger?
Through you, Chair, we currently have, I believe it's about 780 under 21 and probably 600 adult students across our campuses. That would be on the last count date.
Okay. We have 72 students who are in the SAL program, right?
No.
Well,
Through
I
you,
thought we
Chair.
had 28 and
Through you,
44.
Chair, the 28 was on March 31st.
Oh, I see.
Trustee
So
McAllister.
44.
And then on May 15th, it has increased to 44 full-time students.
So can I assume, am I right in assuming then, that all the other students at TR Leger are either 18 years and over?
No. We have, as I said through you, Chair, Our count as of March 31st was approximately 780 students, less than 21. And older than 21 was 700?
615.
I believe I broke down the age, and I would say under the age of 18, we have 583 to be exact.
So we have 44 then who are SAL students. So that means that there are about 756 students who are less than 21.
Correct.
That's a lot.
It's a big school.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The numbers and the breakdown are going to come in a later report this evening. And I think the comprehensive work that Superintendent has done will identify that. And
I guess the question I want to ask is, what is the difference between the SAL students and the 756 who are less than 21?
Through you, Chair. I would say the biggest difference is many of the students that have been counted as full-time students on one of the count dates, if it was March 31st, are attending on a semi-regular basis at TR Léger. Whether they come, there's no question attendance is an issue at TR Léger. Many of the students are faced with a number of barriers that don't allow them to get to the campuses on a regular basis. But I would say the difference between a SAL student and a TR Léger student is, despite all other attempts that we've made through TR Léger, through the mainstream schools, to engage them in their education, they will not attend TR Léger or a mainstream school at all. So what the SAL does, it allows them to continue to work on their academic goals while not having the pressure of attending TR Léger or a mainstream school at all.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Chair.
Go ahead, Trustee Swan.
I'm just wondering what steps are being taken to introduce SAL into our regular high schools.
Through you, Chair. We did talk to all the special services counselors, and we introduced it to them. We did talk to the principals. Bear in mind that it is a pilot that we ran for this second semester. We're hopeful that we will certainly continue to educate the whole board on SAL, and hopefully we'll continue to meet the needs of all the students. So I guess moving forward, that's something that we'll have to look at with both the review and suggestions from you people.
Trustee Gardner.
For you, Chair, so a prerequisite for a student to go into the SAL program is that they have to be in TR Léger and gone through the programs there.
through you, Chair, since February, that's the case. As we move forward, our goal would be to identify students who are not attending in the regular high school before they get to the alternative setting. Set up a comprehensive policy and procedure with committee, and hopefully not have as many students going into alternative ed.
Trustee McPherson.
Through the chair. So just trying to simplify this. The goal and the intention of SAL is the exact same with SALO. In other words, grab those students that were going to disappear over the horizon, reel them back in, and get them into some sort of a progressive learning environment, whether it's school placement, whether it's a co-op placement. So essentially what we've done here is we are still seeking out the vulnerable student, but we are availing ourselves of the expertise of our TR Léger program in dealing with disengaged students. Is that putting it nicely?
Through you, Chair, that's putting it nicely. However, it's not just the expertise and the staffing at TR Léger that is going to make the program work. Again, I'll go back to the our regular high schools. That the staff and our regular high schools need to also be identifying students along with support staff, special services counselors. And if we can identify the student then and engage in a SAL program there, along with not having to add extra staff. So it could be a combination in the home school, but being able to use existing staff both in the system and at TR Leger to develop and deliver the program.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Trustee McAllister, then Trustee Cram.
Superintendent Mills, you mentioned that the SAL program was intended for individual learning for students who do not really conform to either TR Leger or the regular schools. But yet, we're saying here that SAL students have to be in TR Leger. And you also said that SAL students can be part of a regular school program, and if so, how do we track them there?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The students that we identified since February to be part of the SAL program were all part of TR Leger. We had the existing staff within TR Leger, and we felt we had the capabilities to start and begin a program by doing it that way. The intent of SAL, however, is to identify students within the regular high school before they get to alternative. By the students being in the alternative setting, it allowed us to put them right into a SAL program and to see how it would go. And also through you, Mr. Chair, we recognize that there are a lot of things that need to improve, and we need to get better procedures in place and communicate it better to the system. That being said, we've made a real difference for the 44 students there, we believe.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Cram.
Through you, Chair. Tim, you referred several times to the committee,
Yes.
and you've also got on slide, if I can find the number here, can't remember, one of the last slide, the next steps. The board procedure for SAL will be in place for 2015-16. Legislation with SAL says that a student who is to be a SAL student must go through a committee to be identified as a SAL student. When do you propose that the procedure for SAL will be in place for 2015-16? Because logistically, I would say it should be in place for September, because that's when you're opening up the school year and you may have students for September. This is also the end of May.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is a challenge, but we will have it in place for September.
Okay.
We didn't start considering putting SAL in place until January of this year, and by having a soft launch and the success to date, yes, it's a lot of work, but we have a lot of other resources through TR and staff. We have experienced staff, and we have a number of boards who've come before us that have successful policies and procedures in place, and we can reach out to them and get it in place.
Okay. Supplemental then? First of all, I think you need to be commended for at least getting it underway. Whether we did it through the back door or not, at least it got underway. Now I lost what I was going to say. I'll have to think about it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Just a couple of questions, if I may, in a commentary. Superintendent Mills, there seems to be, the legislation has been in place for SAL, and SAL is the replacement for SALEP. They've just changed the acronym, but it still serves a similar purpose. But the process has been in place, and the legislation is there to support the purpose for SAL. But as a board, we have not engaged in it. Is that correct, up until now?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. Trustee McDonald.
So even though the process through legislation has been in place, we haven't engaged in it. We attempted, or we started a pilot project through TR Leger. What is the distinction between a student in a regular school being referred to SAL and a student in TR Leger going into the SAL program? Is it the same?
Through you, Chair. Basically, in the policy documents, it mentions that if a student who is already attending an alternative program, they don't have to go through the SAL process. That's how we interpreted that, but it basically will be the same way as we move forward with the board procedures. Is if a TR Leger student is going to move towards SAL, we will bring his name to the committee and we'll move forward from there.
Right. So you've been, from what I understand, then you've been using the process that's in legislation to differentiate for a student that would already be in an alternative program to be placed into a SAL section because of that loophole, it seems like.
That's correct, Chair.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, my comment then is that if we look at graduation rate as a whole from a board perspective, we heard previously through graduation rate that students, it's a cohort, that schools are responsible for students in the cohort. We know that we have students that leave our system and go to TR Leger, and we know we have students that leave our system and disappear. We are still responsible for those students from a success standpoint. So the ministry has looked at the Upper Canada Board and said, if someone starts with you, we are going to count it towards your graduation rate. The SAL program, from my understanding, is another tool in our arsenal to make sure that we have students engaged and are at least continuing the educational journey. They may be outside of the 4 to 5 year cohort, but have an opportunity to graduate within that time frame that might be extended beyond that 5 year period. Otherwise, if these students left the system, we would lose them forever, and we wouldn't be serving our communities well. So I think the SAL program is good. I think the pilot project is tremendous. It's the fact that we've initiated it in our board. I think there's some good things to come out of this, and I look forward to having an opportunity to have other students be involved in this process. But I guess I want to caution my colleagues and administration is that it's not an alternative process if a child doesn't show up to school, period. We have to have all the other interventions in place. And I think it's important that we use this as only one of the tools, but all the other interventions and all the other engagement processes, engagement pieces are put in place so that we have kids in our schools learning and being successful so that they would graduate on a 5 year cohort. So I commend what's been done, and I look forward to having more success stories in the future.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Trustee Cram.
Last question.
Thank you.
Have we put any thought into how we're going to let principals know in the next 4 weeks how the SAL program will start in September?
Through you, Chair, we will start that right away.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Gentlemen, I want to thank you. I personally want to commend you for the hard work you put into this. I think that a lot of the trustees have made it very clear that they see the value in this program. I think also the underlying comments about the committee and making sure the committee is used. I think also this is an indication, this is just my impression, but I think that SAL had not carried a high priority in the past, and I don't think it was supported necessarily from higher ups. And I think it's obvious that it is supported now. So I thank you very much. Look forward to the journey as it continues. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the next, which is almost a continuation except slightly different. And this is an long time anticipated report that Superintendent Coombs is going to give to us. It came out of a motion back in February 2014, where we had some current concerns in terms of how attendance was being calculated. And so out of that has come this very extensive, very thorough report. So I'd like to turn it over to Superintendent Coombs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. It's really, from my perspective, a privilege to be able to be here tonight and talk about alternative education, especially after the presentation from Superintendent Mills and from Principal Tarasic and from Renee as well. This, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, arose out of a motion made, actually part of the budget process, where there was questioning regarding the attendance at TR Leger and the projections which have been made for FTE enrollment. And so I want to make sure, just as I make this presentation tonight, that I do address that original intent of the motion, that I don't forget that part. But in looking at that component, so the attendance, the projection, the enrollment, I started looking at other data, and from there on in, that led us to other questions. So I will be providing a bit of an overview of TR Leger, and I'd like to thank Principal Trask for being here tonight as well to assist if I miss any of the components of TR Leger. Also to give you some data regarding student outcomes at our alternative site. Give you a little bit of background and some contextual information from the Ministry of Education, as well as a little bit of applicable research around AltEd, and present some recommendations going forward. Again, the original intent of the motion arose out of what was a budget conversation, and back in December, Director Patterson was directed, I guess, to give an internal review of TR Leger, and that was then assigned to myself. And so I'm going to be focusing on the enrollment projection process, a little bit about staffing procedures and attendance tracking, and then going into a bit of an operational review, again, as well as some student achievement data and projections going forward. So originally its mission in '98, when the four boards came together, was to provide diverse, engaging, and flexible programming to adolescents and adults in a caring environment. And I think by those measures, I think TR Leger has been very successful. And it's expanded over the years and served a very diverse clientele in Eastern Ontario. I provided this, and of course, it's very difficult to see that. I hope you can see that better on your surfaces or computers. But I wanted to get a sense, just so that you had a sense of some of the complexity of the programming, and that it's broken down into both credit and non-credit, and that it involves 14 different campuses spread out across Eastern Ontario. So you're looking at a lot of different program delivery for under 21 towards an OSSD or an Ontario Secondary School Diploma, and non-credit over 21 through a variety of funding sources. And I'll talk a little bit about those funding sources briefly in the future. So I started at the Ministry of Education, and this was very interesting. When I talked to the Ministry of Education, I spoke with a couple of people in the Learning to Success portfolios. I spoke Learning to 18 portfolios, Student Success portfolios. I spoke with some of our representatives from the Ottawa regional branch of the Ministry of Education. And there is recognition that there is alternative programming necessary for those that have difficulty succeeding, that there are some students that do not fit into a regular day school program. And that we're encouraged to use innovative approaches to help students gain credits to graduate. Having said all that, there is no, I would say, strategy for early school leavers or from disengaged students who have left school. There's no provincial strategy. And in fact, it's not owned by any particular department of the Ministry of Education. One ministry official said it's orphaned. That it sort of exists a little bit in adult education and continuing education. Part of it exists in the Learning to 18 Student Success portfolio, but there is no overarching strategy for alternative education, nor is there one coming in the near future. Then I asked about some data regarding student achievement and programs in the province, and they don't keep any data on alternative education. There's no data, nor is there a summary of programs that I sought out. There was an attempt, which was aborted in 2007, to try to get some kind of sense of what programs are actually running out there in different boards, and there is no such summary at the provincial level. So while boards are given the mandate to go out and to provide alternative education, there really is very little in the way of criteria from the ministry saying this is what it should look like. And also, there's no data about student outcome. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. I found it really interesting. There was a review done recently by the the Toronto Board of Education on its alternative programs. And it considered alternative our at-risk students, but also alternative would be the International Baccalaureate Program, School of the Arts, as well as School for Sports. So then there was a whole component on outcomes, student outcomes and achievement, and I went to that area because I thought here will be outcomes. And they had outcomes for the International Baccalaureate students and for the sports students and for the art students. And there was no student achievement outcomes for those that were early school leavers or at-risk students. So I found that to be a theme throughout the province and indeed through North America through some of my research. And I will talk about that briefly. This is enrollment projections. And you'll see this is enrollment over the past 6 years, starting in 2009, 2010. What you're seeing is the difference in the blue and green, if we could look at those bars, between the October enrollment and the March enrollment date. And you can see over the course of the last 6 years, there's been a steady decline in enrollment over our secondary population. But the population of TR Leger has stayed approximately the same, or close to it. There hasn't been that same significant decline. So proportionally, in enrollment, we've stayed pretty close to. TR Leger has been pretty static in its numbers, but as a proportion to the rest of the secondary world in Upper Canada, its proportion has increased. And indeed, I think it's about 11.5% this year of our secondary students under the age of 21 are at TR Leger. It is our largest secondary school. Although you could consider it, maybe we have 14 very small schools spread out across Eastern Ontario. But given its total, its enrollment is quite high. This is projected enrollment out to 2020. So the green bar, the large bar, that is our entire secondary enrollment. The other bar is our TR Leger enrollment projections. So you can see that we do expect to continue to decline into 2018, 2019, and 2020, where there's actually a projected little uptick in total enrollment. But based upon historical projections, TR Leger will stay approximately the same size, given our current model. So again, proportionally, TR Leger is a larger school with some of our highest needs students. This is very interesting, and I think this goes a little bit to some of our problems in trying to nail down a number on enrollment for TR Leger. This is student migration from October to March. So the bottom numbers, you'll see that overall in regular day schools, you will see that we get smaller in the secondary level. Now that's for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that some students come back and do a 5th year of high school and graduate in January. Other students drop out. But you can see the top bar, that's TR Leger. TR Leger is our only school that gets larger as the year goes on. So it's fair to assume that a lot of those students who are leaving our regular day schools are migrating over to TR Leger. But they're often doing that after the count date. So those students have been accounted for in the funding model in our regular day school, but they're then transferring over to TR Leger. And then becoming, so that's why you'll often see that our TR Leger school at the end of the year is larger than it was at the beginning of the year. It's problematic if we try to chase an enrollment projection and staff exactly to that projection. One of my recommendations, as you've probably seen, is to pick a static number, which is fairly conservative, and stick to that number and adjust as you go. And that's what a lot of other school boards do. And in fact, since that time of last year, that's what TR Leger has done and our programming department has done. And we have also gotten better at attendance tracking at TR Leger. And Principal Trasick had mentioned during the SAL presentation that the ministry changed the legislation or the funding around consecutive days missed. It used to be consecutive days missed when students would be taken off the roll. That was changed to consecutive classes, which meant we had a dip last year in our overall enrollment when it came to TR Leger. That's been accommodated for through some better timetabling, just a flip timetabling this year. So we don't have that same loss of students that we did in the past year. So I am happy to report that that issue, which caused us some concern last year, caused you some concern last year, and certainly us, has been addressed. Again, I apologize for the Rick Gales font here, but I wanted to give you a sense of the budget revenues and as they come in, and probably the thing which is important to note, and I'll just go forward very quickly and then go back. TR Leger is funded much like our regular day schools. There's a school foundation grant, there's a pupil foundation grant, but unlike other day schools, it also gets funding in the non-credit side. So we also receive funding from the Ministry of Education, but also Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities, Citizenship and Immigration, and the Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration, as well as Citizenship and Immigration Canada, to run some of our language courses and our courses for new immigrants to Canada. So that would be one of the differences in the funding model. Also important to note, and I did note this in my report, from a budgetary standpoint, from those funding sources that are not Ministry of Education, there is a component that goes into our administrative line and helps pay for some of our principal, vice principal costs as well. It's difficult to find objective outcome measures of success for TR Leger, but this is one, and I think it's significant. You'll notice graduation totals over the past 5 years, and it averages about 344 graduates per year. That's by far our largest high school graduation ceremony. Now, albeit it's broken up into 3 or 4 graduation ceremonies, and they start, I think, next week or the week after?
The week after. So
over the next 2 weeks, we will be having those. If you haven't been to a TR Leger graduation, I highly recommend it. They are wonderful ceremonies of celebration. You will notice that a lot of the graduates are older students. Many of them have availed themselves of the PLAR process later in life. Many of them had to drop out for a number of reasons in high school, and they tell a very compelling story of coming back to school, having raised kids, having run businesses, having, in some cases, been laid off from a job and are doing retraining. But when I talk to other boards about their, what numbers do they look at to track their success of their alternative education, they all point to their graduation rate and the fact that a lot of both kids, a lot of adults, would not have the opportunity to seek graduation certificates if they did not have the TR Leger program. So certainly that's a very important marker. However, I wanted to drill a bit deeper because when I talk to other boards about how they market or how they define value of their alternative education, I said, what kind of data do you look at? I got a lot of humming and hawing, and I got a lot of, well, we graduate a lot of people, but I guess my interest was how many credits do kids actually get at TR Leger? And so Terry Gardner, who's presented here many times with other schools, started digging into the TR data when it came to credit attainment. And I apologize for the convoluted nature of this graph. What it tells is that at TR Leger, generally, you're only looking at about credit a student under the age of 21 per year, total. Now, again, I'd like to say that's incredibly, I'd like to be able to say, and this is where that ranks in the provincial standpoint, but the province doesn't track this, and other boards don't track this. So I really have nothing to compare it to. I think it's a valuable marker. I think it's something that we should pay attention to going forward. I think breaking it down into grade level and looking at where those kids get those credits is important. But I am cautious to say this is bad or this is terrible or this is good without having some kind of comparison to. But I think looking at some other pieces of data will be very important going forward in determining, are we getting the bang for our buck in our alternative education program. And I just sort of did a little red circle there. That actually number there you see is the total over the course of the last 5 years average credit attainment of TR Leger students. No presentation of a school would be complete without OSSLT or EQAO data. I included this. It's a fascinating, I was actually in a couple of TR sites on the day of the graduation, the day of the OSSLT test. Approximately 50% of the kids who are eligible didn't show up at TR Leger to write the test. At a regular day school, it's 2 or 3%. So it gives you some, I guess, hint into the students and where they are in their journey at that time. Those are grade 10 students who were eligible to write, but about half of them didn't show up on the day of. When they do show up, their numbers, while certainly a lot lower than our day school counterparts, do show some elements of success. And attendance overall at TR Leger sites run at about 25%. So on any given day, about 25% of the kids who are registered as full-time students will go to the TR Leger site. But teachers do a lot. When they get there, they prepare them for this OSSLT test. They do track them, and they do their very best to prepare them. But because they're not there on an ongoing basis, it becomes very difficult to really complete that kind of preparation. First time we ran a Tell Them From Me data collection survey, and this was the first time we've done this with TR Leger students. I found this fascinating, and quite frankly, I didn't expect to get some of the results that I saw. If you look at the right there, feel safe attending this school. You'll see the Canadian average on the right in the lime green, the light green, and in the solid green is TR Leger. They feel safer. They feel that they have greater advocacy at that school. I mean, they have an adult who connects with them and cares about them. They also, and I didn't include it in I believe I included it in the report. I didn't include it in this presentation, but they experience much less bullying at TR Leger sites. And I had one principal of a regular day school who commented saying, "I would have thought that there would be more bullying there," and quite frankly, that was my expectation. But that confounded me. Now, going to the Ottawa Carleton, they do Tell Them From Me of their alternative schools, and they weren't surprised at all. They get those exact same results because a lot of the kids suffer from anxiety and depression. And go back, there was certainly, and you'll see in the report, a significant higher proportion of anxiety and depression, especially depression in students who are at TR Leger. So if you have the anxiety and you don't like being in the large area, being with large groups, and you certainly have a greater sensitivity to some peer group issues, then TR Leger has been been a very comfortable place for some kids to land. These are some of the boards which I looked at regarding alternative education in Ontario, and the only thing consistent with all of them is that they're all different. So there is no sameness. There's some which match a lot of what we do. I would say Ottawa Carleton would be very similar to the model of program delivery. Hastings, and we talked about SAL just before then. Hastings has hundreds of kids on SAL, and in fact, if you're not at a regular day school, you're in SAL, unless you're 18 and over, and then you're in an alternative setting. So each of those schools, each of those districts deals with it very, very, very differently. They aren't challenged the same way we are with geography. So, for example, Ottawa Carleton has 3 schools which they congregate their alternative programming, and they are able to have 200 to 300 students FTE at those sites, and then provide the same kind of program delivery as we would. But I found it very interesting that when I talk to administrators, and I ask them the same kind of questions like, how do you measure success of your program? It was always the same. There was a lot of humming and hawing, and we have a lot of graduates. So I found it. I would like to add also, there's a real hunger out there in other boards to partner up and to really look at this in greater detail. Because as I said, there is no provincial research on this. There's no provincial data for us to. We're all working in isolation at this time. Now, there is an organization of continuing education administrators which do get together on a regular basis. Outside of that, there is not a lot of data which we compare on a regular basis. I wanted to mention this, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Superintendent Dawes' work and the planning department, who did a lot of help with this. This has been very interesting with the advent of the cohort tracking of grad rate. So as Trustee McDonald had mentioned, those students in grade 9 are your cohort, and they belong to your cohort for their student journey. So what you start seeing is, over the past few months, as I'm chatting with principals, they're starting to compare grad rates. They have what they call an internal grad rate, which is the kids they keep. So they would say, of the grade 9s who stay with us, 92% of them graduate with us. But if you count the kids who leave, those kids, then I'm down to an 82. And I just used one high school as an example here. They have an 88% in-house grad rate and an 82% external grad rate when you count the students who leave. One thing I wanted to point out about this particular data, you'll notice that the numbers they're bolded and underlined. That's active data. It's not active in your presentation, but we now have the ability to click on there and it goes directly to the student. So if you look at the kids who left, 8 kids who left, we click on that and those student names come up, so that schools can now go right in and be very precise with that cohort tracking. So they know exactly the student, where they are right now, if they've left our board, or if they're with another, if they've left province, or if they're with TR Leger. We have that ability to track them precisely, and I think that will be really key when I start talking about some of my recommendations. So just to really summarize quickly, TR Leger, again, our largest secondary school, currently about 11.5% of all secondary students under the age of 21 attend TR Leger. I mentioned in my report that provincially, boards report anywhere between 3 to 6%. I wouldn't hang my hat on that number because a lot of boards don't keep great data. They're sort of spitballing on that data, but that would seem to be within the range of proximity. Significant improvements have been made in attendance and tracking with the transition to Power School, and certainly staffing procedures incorporate that student migration. As I mentioned, hard evidence of student achievement and program efficacy is very sparse, both within UCDSB, but I found that provincially. And indeed, if you looked at some of the research which I looked at, I did it's not a doctoral level thesis, research on some of the findings out there, but that seems to be North America wide. There just is not a lot of hard data on this kind of alternative education student achievement outcomes. There's no ministry strategy regarding alternative education outside of Learning to 18 and student success. And again, as was said specifically to me, there's no one expected in the near future. There's no data, and there's no specific program criteria recommended. I found students, and I should also mention, as you'll see in my report, I had a number of principals and vice principals assist me with this, who would go out and do interviews in the sites with teachers, with staff, and with parents. Students, by and large, feel a very safe and welcoming environment. There is no parent council, and it was difficult finding the active parent voice, although that's been raised at our parent involvement committee meetings, and they are very anxious to move forward in assisting us in gathering more parent involvement next year. Teachers were very interested in more opportunities to collaborate with teachers both within TR and without. So they all expressed, the ones we spoke with, a real desire, because as you can imagine, some of these sites have 1 or 2 teachers. Well, you can feel isolated after a while if you're working in that kind of isolation. I mentioned credit attainment being low, but more examination being necessary before really fully understanding that. I've talked about other school boards and some of their programs varying based upon geographic and demographic circumstances. And this is perhaps one of the most important findings. Again, the independent learning modules, or the ILMs, where students complete 20 lessons, is still the predominant method of delivery. And that means, there are lots of advantages to that, because as students come and go into TR Leger, if they complete lesson 6 and they're gone for 3 weeks, they can come back and do lesson 7. And there is certainly encouragement from administration to modify some of those 20 lessons to accommodate more student interest and need. I would say that there are some pockets of some excellent teachers really modifying some of that work for student need. In other areas, I would say it's simply students working right out of the pen and paper textbook workbook. So I come to my proposed actions based upon my report. My first, as I mentioned, that TR should be staffed on a static number based on historical data, that we don't try to chase the migration and staff accordingly. That is happening this year. We've had a much better, I think certainly we've had a much more successful, certainly from a revenue standpoint and from a service standpoint. The second one is about operational procedures. So, and I should point out, over the past 10 years, there has been a real move towards aligning TR Leger more with board operations. There was a time at TR Leger where it operated almost like a separate board. There was sort of the upper Canada board and the TR Leger board. That has gap has narrowed. I think certainly going forward, especially as we go into some difficult times regarding some fiscal arrangements, I think having our staff interspersed and certainly talking more and collaborating more as it comes to attendance tracking, as it comes to some of the operational procedures around the financial management, I think that will become important as we go forward. Certainly, I think we need more data to really get a better idea of if we are being successful with these, our most vulnerable children. If you think about it, these kids really represent our 90%. These are the kids who are our most vulnerable students. And I think we need to take much more as a senior team, a senior administration in tracking this data and doing it on a year-to-year basis. I think the Tell Them From Me data was fascinating. I think that should be done annually as an example, and I think those results certainly included within school success planning. I think day schools, regular day schools, should review all TR students who belong to their grade 9 cohort at the end of each semester at a minimum. This happens, by the way. There are schools which do that. The principal and vice principal go to the local TR campus and review specifically the students who they've sent there recently, and looking at their look at their success rate. How are they doing? Are they attending? Do they need any assistance? As one staff member said, you know, we understand that we're going to take students who are really struggling at the day school, but the door has to swing both ways. So if students are not having success at TR Leger, it should be open and welcoming coming back. That has been improved over the past few years at TR Leger. There is better communication in the day school, but we can do better than that, than we're doing right now. I think there is still this culture somehow that if a student goes to TR, they have gone to TR and they no longer belong to me. I think the concept of student ownership is critical for us to have these kids succeed, because it'll be very easy for them to slip through the cracks. Further to that, I talk about a standardized process for transitioning students. There is some standardized processes out there, but it's not applied evenly across the board. I think it needs to be standardized and applied and monitored. So if a student goes to TR Leger, there's a plan in place, that there is an expectation and some goals set, and that there is shared ownership between TR Leger and the family of schools. The secondly is program delivery. We talk about a hybrid model of instruction, so that teachers have the freedom to build learning activities that bundle expectations from a variety of courses. That learning style and need and interest be taken into consideration with every child. So Ottawa Carleton District School Board, before every new student that enters their alternative school, will first do a needs assessment and a life skills and academic course. It's a 3-week course, and it, number one, gets the alternative school the opportunity to get to know the child better and what they're interested in. But it also says we need to give you some tools to help you in your academic journey. I think there's some real value in looking at that, those practices. I think TR Leger should actively seek the parent voice. It will be difficult. The students, a lot of the parents spoke negatively about TR Leger. They didn't want their child to go there. There was a stigma attached to it. But I think there's really a great opportunity, and it may not, again, include all 14 campuses from every end of the board. But I think working with the Parent Involvement Committee to assist us in this, I think we can start developing some community cafes or community organizations which draw parents in, and we actively seek out that voice. And I will readily admit, I think my report lacks the parent voice, and I would really seek to go there more. This perhaps is the most controversial one, and I want to explain my thinking on this and the wording in this. We know that successful graduates at TR Leger predominantly are older students, 18 to 21, or adults who have availed themselves of the PLAR process, or what we used to call the maturity credits. I believe that there is an important need for a safe and welcoming place for some students at a portion of their journey that may be under the age of 18, that may have less than 16 credits. But from the data which I'm looking at, if a student goes to TR Leger under the age of 18 and they've only got a handful of credits, they are not successful within that 5-year window. They are not going and getting 6, 7, or 8 credits. And I understand that there may be a time when it's necessary for a season in their life to have a safe environment where they slow things down. And staff and administration talked about this. There are some students that just need to slow things down, that they've got so much going on in their lives that there needs to be an opportunity to just collect themselves and consolidate where they are. So I use the word should, not must. I think the default mode should be our day school keeps our kids and until at least they get 16 credits. However, if there are certain circumstances where a child absolutely has that need at a significant point in their life, that we rigorously support that child in that transition. We monitor how that child does at TR Leger, and we keep the gate open. As I said, the gate swings both ways, so that the child can return at a point of their choosing, and certainly at a point of time which would be right for them. I think the biggest thing which came out of this for me was that there is a need for TR Leger. There is a need for a place where kids can go and be supported. That there are students suffering from anxiety and depression, from life circumstances that really need that opportunity. And I think that should be honored, and there should be a place for that. But I think there needs to be rigorous care applied in perhaps a more rigorous criteria applied to that. We talk about rigorous care. We've never defined what exactly that means. What does it mean for rigorous care? I think we need to go about I believe our next step is to really define carefully what that means for our students who are 14, 15, 16 years old, especially, who are not succeeding in our day schools, who may need an alternative environment. I think there needs to be a very good plan with a review date. And again, as I said, the door's got to swing both ways. I have found this incredibly compelling work. I think this is not the end. I think this is just a new beginning for alternative education. And I also want to stress that this is not just about TR Leger. I believe that this is truly about secondary education across our board and indeed across the province. And I really look forward to seeing what TR Leger is going to do going forward in the future. Thanks for your time, and I'll certainly take any questions.
Thank you very much. Trustee McPherson.
Question. You last year had 392 graduates. Now, what percentage of those were under 21 students?
I don't have the breakdown for that.
That includes the over 21 students?
That would include also the over 21s. I don't know if off the top of your head you could conjecture on that.
Through you, Chair, we can find out that information, I guess I would say.
No, I'm just more concerned whether this was the under 21 number. You also do training for PSWs. You'll see part of your graduating classes are actually getting a certificate in something else.
Through you, Chair, we have not done the PSW program since I've been there at TR Leger.
Okay, so that's something that's fell by the wayside. I never missed a TR Leger graduation. It's curious that sometimes people I was in grade 8 with have lived their entire lives without a grade 12 certificate. You talk about building data. One of the things that has happened within the day schools is an exit poll. And as a trustee, quite often when I leave a TR Leger graduation, I ask myself, did this actually make a difference in their lives? So what would be the possibility of us including an exit poll, say, 1 year after, to find out where these students have gone? Simply, and that would be an indication of the success. Just ruminating here. So.
Mr. Chair, that we've, although it wasn't included in my report, we have actually had that exact conversation regarding client satisfaction for TR Leger. It's an excellent opportunity for us to gather more data on, how successful they felt they were, and did it meet their needs, and what could we do better. So I think that's an excellent point.
Mr. Chair?
Trustee McDonald, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to jump in on Trustee McPherson's comment. Part of the next level driven document and one of our key results indicators through the accountability framework is a graduation survey. So it's yet to be rolled out, but there is a plan in place, or at least an intention, I guess, to begin to survey our graduates, not only from TR Leger, but all of our graduates, to see how successful they've been after they have left our system.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Trustee McAllister, then, sorry, Phil. I thought you said yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Superintendent Coombs. That was, I find your report to be authoritative, visionary, and compassionate, so very well done. It also raises many questions in my mind, and in everybody's mind. But there's no doubt that our most vulnerable students attend TR Leger, and that these students do not function well in a regular structure high school, and that they do need the personalized attention and differentiated instruction. But we have we learned tonight, over 750 students approximately under 21 who are enrolled in TR Leger. I guess my question is, this seems unusually large, and do all of these 750 students need to be there? Or, to be blunt and frank, is TR Leger sometimes viewed as an out by the students and by maybe our secondary schools?
Certainly. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. To be frank, I think that culture is changing, but I believe the culture still exists, and I believe it exists in our board. I believe it exists also across the province. And I will be, to be quite honest with you, as the Vice Principal of North Grenville District High School, I remember counseling students over to TR Leger. And I remember saying, if you get a couple of credits, you can come back. But you're not being successful here, so go get a couple of credits. So it was sort of a double jeopardy for them, because if they were successful and did get a couple of credits, I would say, well, you're being very successful at TR Leger. I think it's a good idea that you stay there because you're experiencing success. Or if they didn't get a couple of credits, you could say, well, but you didn't get those 2 credits, so you really can't come back. And now that is a long time ago, and I think I've developed as a professional since that time. But I don't think we're that far removed from that culture. I can tell you that that every time that I would mention our numbers to other boards and to the ministry, they would go, that seems high. So I wish I could come to this table with a lot more definitive answer for you, saying this is definitely high and we need to be half. But it just, again, as I said, it's very difficult to nail people down on exactly what that should be. The research is very clear that for some students, an alternative setting is absolutely necessary. I think my hypothesis right now is that no, we shouldn't be that high, and that proportionally we shouldn't be that large. However, I want to continue testing that hypothesis, and certainly I know that TR Leger and Superintendent Mills will be engaging in that, as well as with Superintendent Dawes. But I think, again, when I talk about rigorous care, certainly the example which I state from my own experience was not rigorous care. It was more about the adults in the school feeling more comfortable than us serving that child. I do believe that is changing significantly. That has changed since Learning to 18 came out, and I think that's continuing to change going forward. I believe, if I may, just very briefly, Mr. Chair, I think my next step is to share this more succinct, with our day school principals, to talk about what my recommendations are, not just for TR Leger, but for us as a system, and engage in that conversation too.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Superintendent Coombs. I just wanted to follow up from the perspective of there are now some structural changes coming from the ministry. For instance, the notion of your cohort in grade 9 and subsequent years being being used to identify your graduation rate. So while Superintendent Coombs explains that perhaps in years gone by, secondary principals weren't particularly paying close attention to the success rate of the students who left their school and went to TR Leger. Now they have a vested interest in understanding how successful those students are, and because they are counted toward the local high school graduation rate if they registered at that local high school in grade 9. So that's very different, and that secondary principals pay attention to their graduation rates, and if there's opportunity to work with TR Leger, and once you get that dialogue and interaction and collaboration between the TR Leger site and the local school, then the opportunity for, as Superintendent Coombs says, for the door to swing both ways, that can be realized, and there can be much more potential for back and forth than perhaps that we see now.
Thank you. Trustee Cartner.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, I really enjoyed reading through this and getting some of the answers that I've had over the years of TR Leger since I've been trustee and even before that. I have a couple of questions though, and on your report on page 8 with the budget breakdown, I'm kind of curious why TR Leger and Prescott Russell are separated when you report them in your budget, and maybe that's a question for Renee as opposed to.
Yes, through you, Chair, if I may, David. That is changing actually for next year, Trustee Cartner. We did that in the past just to reconcile the partnership a few years ago, and that just continued as part of a practice. But in speaking with Nancy's finance department, we did come back with that recommendation to consolidate those two as one budget report. Good question.
On the same budget line, thank you for that. I figured that was the answer, but I wanted to hear from you. E-learning. There's a budget line for e-learning. Is it being used by the amount of money that's attributed to it? It must be being used. The students find that an easy way of learning through the courses as opposed to this module that they have 20 lessons or they have to go through?
A couple of things through you, Chair, in regards to that budget. It's not used as much as it was in the past. The intent of that particular dollar amount was for a few things. Number one, we would have had our board representation, I think we called it a DELC if I'm not mistaken. So that particular salary would have been through that particular budget, as well as in some cases, we're not able to deliver the e-learning courses through Upper Canada District School Board and may have to pay for those courses through Avon Maitland or some other boards as well. So those dollars were there for that. So if you're looking at, you're not seeing those dollars being spent in the current year, there's no anticipation for this school year that those dollar amounts or the expense amount will change much more than what it is now.
Thank you. I have some other questions, but perhaps someone else would like to.
Trustee Cram, I'll come back to you. Trustee Cram.
Thank you, Trustee Chair, Trustee McMillan, the Chair.
You're really pushing it tonight,
It's
aren't
getting
you?
a long way here.
Yeah, there we go.
I do have a motion that I want to present to the board, but I think it would probably be beneficial to wait till the end of the discussion to bring it on, but that's...
I have an idea what you're talking about, so I think it'd be a good idea. We'll let the discussion unfold and then come back to that. You okay with that?
Yeah.
Thank you. Trustee Wendy McPherson.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Thank you so much for that report. I love the way you deliver a report. I wanted to ask you, with regards to your last proposed action, what is happening now and what would be the impact of that on accepting an enrollment?
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. I think the implementation of this will be, I think there'll be some cautious steps if accepted. And I think we don't want to deny program to students who desperately need it. My intention of this was to be, I think, first of all, to get people's attention that that students are falling through the cracks, that when students go to TR Leger for any length of time, they generally don't get the same number of credits that their cohort does if they are in day school. Now, there's reasons for that. So I'd like to see that there be, that we really define what rigorous care means, and I think we have finally an opportunity to do that. There are boards which right now are contemplating 20 credits or 24 credits. You know, and again, as I said before, there are also boards that are just that if you're not in a day school, you're in SAL. I think it's because there is no set ministry criteria of how we do this is both a little bit disconcerting, but also an opportunity. I think that gives us an opportunity as a board to say, how should we define that going forward? I didn't want to set out specifically, it has to look exactly like this, because I just haven't had enough consultation with other professionals regarding this around the board. But I think we will have an opportunity to say who should be, and if I may sort of bring us back to Trustee McAllister's comment, you know, should that number of students be there? I think we have to start answering that question. And we do that one student at a time, being very specific about a program with a review date and also that opportunity to always come back.
So right now, is there a credit amount that they have to get in with?
Right now, there is no credit amount. In fact, many of them, they may be 14 or 15 years old, and they've maybe only got 2 or 3 credits, or 5 or 6 credits. And maybe they're not attending on a regular basis. Maybe behaviorally, there is a lot of issues within the school. So I guess I don't want to say that they absolutely cannot go to TR Leger until they have 16 credits. But I do want to say I think we need to look as a board saying, how does that student then get to TR Leger? It shouldn't be just an automatic default. There should be a very rigorous handoff, and that there needs to be a plan for that. I have a lot of ideas of what that might look like, but I wanted to limit the scope of how specific I was in my recommendations. Thank you.
Trustee Gardner, you want another question?
I don't have many, but maybe this motion refers to many questions. Yes, on the EQAO data, the data that you have for the province, is that the day school data?
I'm sorry, let me just look at that again. I believe that's our board data.
You have province and then you have TRs.
I'm sorry, you're quite right, yes.
So
that is my apologies if I skip to that.
15.
Oh, thank you. That's what we call method 2 data. So those are those that are eligible, and it takes away those that have been deferred or who are absent. Am I correct on that? My method 2? Okay, thank you. That does not include, and I believe in my report I included more data regarding the absent and deferred. So you just had an idea that, again, half the kids who were supposed to write at TR Leger this year didn't show up. 2% of the rest of the kids in our regular day school didn't show up.
And I know that when we get closer to the motion, we're going to be focusing in on number 8, which is the last one dealing with the 16 credits. So if you have questions on that, let's leave that to closer to the end, and we'll deal with the other questions and then come back to this, because I think it's going to be an extensive conversation. So do we have any other questions other than in that particular area?
Through you, Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Trustee Swan.
I think it was inferred earlier in the presentation. I thank you very much for the presentation. But some parents feel that there's a stigma for their children to attend TR Leger, and I'm just wondering, I guess, what are we doing to promote TR Leger, or what are you doing to promote TR Leger as a way for them to be successful and gain their credits? The students.
Thank you, Trustee Swan. Through you, Mr. Chair. I think TR Leger, some of it is the messaging, not just from TR Leger, but from our day school principals. I think we need, and I don't know if I included this data in my report or not, but I did do a survey with administrators on their perceptions of TR Leger. And they do report a greater knowledge and awareness of TR Leger and the programs that it serves, the kind of students that it serves. So some of it's the messaging from our day school principals. I think also, I wonder, one of my inquiries, and somewhere I didn't go in this report, is what's the messaging from staff, especially guidance counselors at our secondary schools. I'm wondering how they're presenting TR Leger as an option. I have had calls from parents who say, my child is being kicked out of the day school and they have to go to TR Leger. And as a safe school superintendent, those are the kind of calls that I get sometimes. And I guess that my concern for that is I know that was not exactly what was said by the principal, but I know that that was the message that was received by the parent. So I think we need to do some more work in messaging, Trustee Swan, to our principals, vice principals, and guidance counselors. I also think that there is that if we look at program delivery, and if I can use one example, one of the research papers on one particular, it was in the States, of an alternative school. They changed the name of their alternative school to that of Center for Innovation and Creativity, which I thought was extremely interesting and a nice little twist on it. I didn't go so far as to say we should be the TR Leger School of Innovation and Creativity, but that's not a bad idea, I guess I would say.
Thank you. Trustee Bill McPherson.
Yes. I'm dying to see what this motion is, but following up on what Trustee Swan says, and I'll admit I've got a kind of an in here because I do drive a bunch of TR Leger kids to school. And there seems to be a stigma about being a TR Leger student. And it's almost as if they've been placed into exile. And one of the things that seems to be missing, except for graduation night, is a school spirit. A sense of identity, a sense of pride. It's as if they've been sent out in the wilderness and they're no longer, well, I know some of the kids that I talk to, their main goal is to get back to the day school. Get those credits in, get themselves back on their feet and get back to the day school. Part of it could do with parental engagement. I don't have the answers, I've just got questions. And it's hard when you've got 14, different campuses, quite often housed in less than stellar facilities. they are using facilities in some cases that we no longer use for the day school. So as we search to measure success, I would also like to see a parallel process to enhance the pride or the identity of that school. You never see a kid wearing a TR Leger turtleneck or anything like that. There's no pride in being there. And I'll admit, they are a little rough around the edges sometimes. So I'd like to see something like that moving forward, that it becomes less of a sense of being exiled. And it may come from more communications between your administration at the day school and your local TR Leger Center.
Through you, Chair.
Yes.
I'd just like to comment that I'd really like to give kudos to my peers in the mainstream area, because I think I agree with Superintendent Coombs. I think the relationship that TR Leger campuses and the mainstream principals in the schools have has improved dramatically. For example, today I was over meeting with Vice Principal Holm, and BCI and TIS were meeting with the Brockville Foundation staff to discuss the next steps for many of the students on where they would start in September. I was up in the north, and I met with both Almont and Carleton Place with Jamie Campbell and myself to discuss very similar things. So I think that has improved dramatically. And to you, to Trustee McPherson, I guess I would say there's definitely the stigma, except for many of the kids. Many of the kids take great pride in being there. I can tell you that when we do sell things, they are quite popular, and I'll make sure you get one of our golf shirts because we have them. But it's quite interesting, and it's really driven again by the caring adults in the campuses. And if that caring adult is prepared to do a lot of those things, I mean, there are celebrations that I think occur often, and you're right, the stigma's still there. I'm not questioning that, but you know, they often take great pride in having lunches together on a Thursday afternoon and things like that. So I think that I think we have made great strides in I guess eliminating some of that stigma, but we have a long way to go.
Through you, Chair, a secondary, please.
Yes, go ahead, Trustee Swan.
Is there any way that we could incorporate sports activities, teaming up a TR Leger school, such as Brockville, which has 2 high schools, for the 14 to 17-year-old age group where they can be engaged in sports? I don't think it's being done now. If it is, please share that with me. But I'm just saying to give them, as Trustee Bill McPherson said, a more sense of engagement, a sense of pride. And I have heard a lot about them not having sports through TR Leger.
Through you, Chair. We have made some steps towards that. They can certainly play individual sports. We've joined the associations, and we have encouraged them to play individual sports. The team sports may be a different concept. I mean, it's something that we can look if a student was cross-enrolled possibly and staying within their mainstream school and participating with their home school. We experienced that last year, I believe, with TIS and a few athletes. So I think that it certainly is something to look at. The one thing I would say is I think we need to find some new sports to engage them as well, though. I think some of them don't play the mainstream sports, and I think that we'd have to look at some different activities. I've often said that some of the more popular activities that I had at a mainstream school when I was there was the nerd club and the anime club. And you know, when they first came in, we all said, well, those will never run in the school, and they were the most populated clubs. So I think we'd have to look at some other alternative sports as well.
Thank you. You know, as the chair of the meeting, I don't say much, or I'm not supposed to say much, but, you know, as someone who's a huge fan of TR Leger and goes into some of the schools and goes to the graduation, I tell you, they stand up with pride that they are graduating from TR Leger, and TR Leger gave them the opportunity to get that piece of paper that for some of them, they've searched for their entire life. And I'll tell you, that room is filled with pride. And when I drop over to foundations and talk to the kids, and some of the kids that I would see when I was at Thousand Islands, they're just beaming. So it's a wonderful opportunity. All right, I shouldn't have said that, but I did. Trustee Carter.
Just a couple of comments, and I won't put it in the form of a question, but I'm noticing from some of the comments of the students that they're very happy there and they feel safe and they're not being bullied like they were in the regular stream. But there's also the student that's saying, I miss the social aspect of the group, and more chances to do hands-on kind of activities as opposed to paper and pencil. And just I would like whoever to think about in the future getting these children back into the programs that we have in our high schools that are fantastic for hands-on. The shops, the living, I can't remember the name of them now, it's just lost me, but where they're doing the cooking and that kind of thing, so that they can feel part of that school as well and know that the door is open for them to come back full-time. And secondly is the parent or the staff themselves looking for more PD. I think I brought this up quite a few meetings ago about the professional development being shared with the alternative ed staff. And I was told at the time that they always get invited. Well, I hope that this will continue as well. But I know TR Leger is very important. I enjoy the grads just like Chair McMillan does, and all of the trustees that we talk about those TR Leger grads a lot. So thank you.
And any of our new trustees that haven't been to one, bring a box of Kleenex. Any other comments, questions? Because I want to zero in on Trustee McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, I've enjoyed the discussion, and I want to just pick up on the comments that Superintendent Coombs has made, and some of the points that he's made as well. And certainly, the original intent of the motion was as a result of that enrollment issue that we had, and I think we're almost back to 2 years ago. And it seems that there's been measures in place to ensure that we've got some things to help us through that. Certainly the provincial legislation with 15 classes has put a bit of a wrench into things. But what I wanted to focus on was the enrollment aspect and the 700 and some students. And when I read through the report, the detailed report as opposed to the PowerPoint, I think, our enrollment is at about 12%, I think is what our numbers were saying. And provincially, or with the boards that that Superintendent Coombs has engaged with, it's somewhere between 3 and 5%, if I'm not mistaken. So we are high. Now, and I want to go back to Superintendent Coombs' comments. Is that good or is that bad? I don't know. I think it's important for us to dig deeper in this process, and I'm encouraged by Superintendent Coombs' comments that we do need to do a little bit more analysis on this. It may be legitimate, but I think there is an opportunity for us to examine how we've done things and to see if there's an opportunity for improvement. In fact, I think this whole report is simply that, a continuous improvement process to make sure that we are meeting the needs of kids with TR Leger. Moving forward, I understand that we want to hold off on the 0.8 because there's a motion coming forward. However, I think there are a number of things that are put in place with the recommendations by Superintendent Coombs that will certainly have an emphasis within our home schools or our day schools that will ensure that when students are in the building that we are doing everything possible to have those students remain in the building and be successful as part of that cohort graduation. And if not, then we have a means for those children to extend, or those students to extend their learning environment. And I think that's an important piece that we've picked up on here. Superintendent Coombs has said, we have a place for TR Leger. It's just what it looks like now. It may be different in the very near future. So I'm encouraged by this report, and I think it's a good work in progress, and we've got certainly a lot more work to do. So I'll wait and allow the comments or the motion to come forward on number 8, Mr. Chair, but I may have other questions after.
Sure, thank you so much. Trustee McAllister.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the accountability framework and the next level driven document, we talk about indicators. Well, 2 of the key result indicators must be graduation rate and credit attainment. I'm wondering, I guess it's either a question or a suggestion, if you would consider all the steps, your proposed actions, if you would frame them in terms of key performance indicators as well, so that we might have some measure by which to judge the success of Pierre Léger and the progress that we are making.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that question. That's precisely where I think we need to go. I'm very encouraged that there seems to be, certainly from around this table and certainly from the system, that people really want to have some evidence put to the stories. Because oftentimes when it comes to alternative education, we depend upon our assumptions, sometimes our biases, when it comes to the value we place. And I think there's a story, there's a place for that. But I would be very pleased to continue working. Yes, I can. I can put those into indicators. And I'd be absolutely thrilled to do that on an ongoing basis. Yeah.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Certainly.
Many of my colleagues here have mentioned, and so the students in the Tell Them From Me comments, such as more hands-on courses, shops, the social aspect, structure of a regular class, sports, etc. I'm wondering, is there a viable model for blended learning, for a hybrid model between a regular secondary program and TR Léger?
Certainly, if I can maybe take the first stab at that, and certainly would invite Principal Trasick to add. One of the boards which we examined was Thames Valley, and Thames Valley, and I think I mentioned in my report about the sacred 20 lessons, and that there and a lot of other boards were saying, I don't know how to get away from those sacred 20 lessons. That it just seems to be that we're locked into those individual learning modules because of the transience of students. And I've had one staff member actually say, well, the kids really enjoy boring curriculum because then they know what to expect. But Thames Valley is working at getting away from that and creating, again, what I call a hybrid model. But really what it is an opportunity to start bundling curriculum expectations from a variety of different courses and put those in some semblance of whether activity or project that students are really interested in and engaged in. I think there's real possibility there. I think that needs more examination. And one of the things I learned from this is I think there are some great partners out there that want to do this work too, that are very interested in the lack of objective data, as well as looking at other ways of delivering that kind of program. So yes, there are some models out there, but like I said, there's not a whole lot. I think we have an opportunity to really create and be innovative in this space.
Thank you. And just before I move on to the motion, there's just one point I think that needs to be clear, is that Superintendent Schoon, you did the report, but as soon as this report has been presented, you'll be passing it off to the senior team, and then all of the discussions and all the suggestions that have been made so far will be turned over to the senior team to put that into action. So it's we can sit and task Superintendent Coons all we want. He's going to be handing off. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. And,
through you, Chair, one last comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Or question.
Yep.
I really liked when the idea of perhaps looking at changing the branding, changing the name. Would this be a separate item? Would this be a separate motion? How can we ask them to look into this? I'm looking for direction here.
Yeah, I think that would be a different discussion, but it certainly has been noted and been planted in the heads, I'm sure, of the senior team that may want to bring that back to us at some time. So thank you. All right, I'm going to turn this over to Trustee Cram.
Chair, would it be possible to have the motion on the screen? I know Lisa has it beforehand, so I don't forget the wording of it.
Okay. We'll give Lisa a second to do that.
I suppose I need to introduce it by reading it, correct?
That would be a good idea.
Let me go back to the email.
I have it. I will read it.
Okay.
Okay, this is a motion that, whereas the Upper Canada District School Board approved the following, that proposed action item 8 in the TR Leisure Review Report presented to the board on May the 27th, 2015 be postponed until a February 2016 meeting to consider, for consideration for implementation in September 2016. Proposed action item 8, any student who has not yet completed 16. This is the new one now?
That's the wording of the proposed action, the second part.
The actual action that he's referred to.
Okay. And so I'll just read the action which was on the screen, it's not there now. It says any student who has not yet completed 16 credits towards the OSSD and are under the age of 18 should not be admitted to your leger with the exception of successful destination able transition programs. So your motion is asking that number 8 be suspended for a year?
Till February.
February. Okay, so do I have a mover, a seconder? Trustee McAllister. So I'll open this up for discussion. Comments? Certainly can.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Superintendent Coombs, I really appreciated your comments on this particular section because I'm not necessarily opposed to it. And I was glad to see your explanation as to why you use the word should. My concern right now is with the report that we had previous to this one, where we have students that are SAL students at TR Leger, and we have a committee supposedly being struck in September to address who should be a SAL student and who should not. Many of those students, I'm assuming, would not have 16 credits and therefore should not be admitted to TR Leger. When the committee is struck, there could be students who could be going to TR Leger if that committee deemed it appropriate. So I would rather see this particular action come back in February of next school year to give the SAL committee the opportunity to get up and running to see how it affects the students who are currently at TR Leger. And I made the motion this particular way so that you could continue with the other 7 proposed actions that you have and also be doing some work towards this proposal if you were intending to do that as well.
Thank you. Trustee McAllister, you want to talk about it?
I support Trustee Cram because I think it's rather arbitrary at this point. You know, and I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done prior to that, and you have alluded to that in your report. But there are such issues as staffing, resources, professional development for staff, program, etc., that need to be examined if we are to proceed with this. And as we should, at least I think we should be proceeding to a greater emphasis on the day's regular school as opposed to using TR Leger. But anyway, so I support the motion.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Trustee McPherson, then Trustee Williams. Bill McPherson first.
Would it not be possible to simply add the SAL students to the exemptions? Like in my mind, I'm actually seeing SAL does not necessarily include admission to TR Leger. It can happen through the day school. TR Leger is simply one more avenue to use for certain students. So if you simply, now of course, the fly in the ointment here is we have a mandated committee which has not met to set the criteria, so I can understand that concern. Okay, I'm just ruminating, I guess.
Well, I think if someone can clarify that and nail down what that thinking was, is there a conflict? Is there potential for a conflict with our SAL students? Or do you see it as an issue? Like, I think it's important to explore this before we go any further.
Through you, Chair.
Yes, sir.
The only thing I would say is that with the SAL committee can certainly make that recommendation. But again, within all the policy and procedures, it says that all alternative means should be exhausted before the students move to SAL. So I guess that's my only concern, and I guess that's kind of why when I worked on the pilot project, I kind of went through TR Léger, because how do we know that that alternative setting would not work if we didn't try it with every student?
Just one question. If student A leaves SFDCI and moves to whether it's a SAL program or a TR Léger program, whose school roster do they remain on? Does TR Léger maintain a parallel school roster, or same as when we looked at the graduation rates, we are now including TR Léger grads with their registered school. So do they remain SFDCI students that have been diverted to alternate programming?
Through you, Chair. I guess depending on when that student is transferred to TR Léger, for graduation purposes, if they've started in grade 9, they'll always remain on FDC's roster for their graduation rate. For TR Léger and the SAL program, the way it's set up now, if it was done on October 31st, they would be counted on the TR Léger registers.
Okay. That's clear. Thank you so much for that. Any other comments or questions? Oh, yes. Trustee Wendy McPherson.
I guess you're gonna have to forgive me, Chair. I'm so wet behind the ears when it comes to TR Léger.
Absolutely, no
And
problem.
I apologize but I'm trying to understand what's wrong with what's going on now that we need to put this in place. Is that a valid question?
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's a very valid question. I guess my the discussion around this arose from looking at credit attainment for students under the age of 18 who are at TR Léger. It's also looking at a little bit of data regarding successful graduates from TR Léger, and concern that the students who leave day schools and go to TR Léger simply don't get that many credits, and in fact get between 1 or 2 credits a year. Now in some cases, and again, as I said before, in some cases that might be all they could really get at that time given the state of what's going on. I guess my question would be, if the day school is truly not working for them, and if they really are struggling with just simple attendance, that we not absolutely take that off the table, but that it become a very rigorous process, much more rigorous than it is now. I guess I would say that would be the change I would like to see, that there would be much greater rigor applied to which students went to TR Léger who were 14 or 15 years old, and that there be a plan to review and to recommend return to the day school should they not be successful at TR Léger. I guess I don't want to see. I guess the real concern arises, and I think again some of this is historical, that generally students who are 14 or 15 and go to alternative education, and again this was supported by talking to the director of Success to 18 provincially, they don't graduate. They generally don't graduate, certainly not within their 4 or 5 year cohort. So having said that, I guess the reason why I wanted to say should, I said in an ideal world, our students would stay in their home school, be tracked and rigorously supported, and be, reason why I say this is not just a TR Léger issue. I really believe that there are more things that our secondary schools can do to become more welcoming and engaging and inclusive.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other comment? And on the telephone line?
One last question, please.
Go ahead.
Through you, Chair. I'd just like to ask, do we think we'll lose more students by passing this motion, or by losing credit, or gain more students gaining credits?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I think if students who stay in the day school get more credits, it's a bit of a chicken or egg kind of conversation that we're having, because you know, you could say this: if the students stay in day school, then they're going to get more credits. But what if the students aren't going to attend day school? What if the students are in such a family situation that they're just simply unable to focus and have some significant anxiety or mental health issues? I think there is a place for TR Leger for all students or for alternative education. I guess I guess I would say that that every student, and when I showed that data with the live data, which you click on and goes right to the student, I think we are at a position no other time in the history of education where we can be that specific with our data, where we can drill down to the specific student where they are and what the plan is for their eventual return. But there is a culture, I believe, that still exists provincially and through all of alternative education, that there are some students who should just be somewhere else. I think that culture needs to be challenged. I think that needs to be certainly, I think rigorously questioned. And I think sometimes we have been making decisions based upon history or bias or tradition that needs to be challenged in a more rigorous way. And I think that's why I wrote the recommendation the way I did. I guess in some ways I regret maybe I should have said, and I should have toned it down a little bit, but I really wanted to really impress upon people that these are our most at-risk and vulnerable students. And I think in the past, TR Leger has been mentioned before, or alternative education has been used as a bit of an ejection, as a bit of, you know, they're just too much trouble here. They should go somewhere else. I think that's my concern, and I think that I think there is a real appetite right now in our system to really look at that. And as Director Patterson said, you know, your cohort is your cohort. They belong to that school, and even if they are TR Leger students, they are still belonging to that school. It's really about student ownership and rigorous care.
Thank you. I'm going to bring it back to you, Trustee Crown. Look at a vote.
Thank you, Chair. That's exactly why I made this proposal on the floor. I think we need time to get our principles around. I think the motion, that proposed action certainly can come back for discussion in February to implement the following year, but it gives us 4 to 5 months to get our principals on board, and also it gets the SAL committee up and running to make better recommendations for which students go to TR Leger, or which students stay in the daycare, or the day school with the, well, it could be daycare too, but into the day school with appropriate support. So I think we need time to get that to happen.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, thank you for that. I agree, and part of this also is, as you'll notice, there have been a number of secondary principals I've consulted and questioned on numerous occasions regarding this, both this proposal and the report itself, but I haven't talked to all of them, at least not to the depth that I think I need to, or with Superintendent Mills or the rest of the senior team and program. So this also gives us an opportunity, if I may, to get more feedback regarding programming for these students from principals, vice principals, as well as other staff, student success staff.
Thank you very much. So I have a motion on the table, moved by Trustee Cram, seconded by Trustee McAllister. Whereas the Upper Canada District School Board approved the following. that postponed action item 8 in the TR Leger review report presented to the board on May the 27th, 2015 be postponed until a February 2016 board meeting for consideration for implementation in September 2016. Actually, cast your votes, please. Trustee Swan? And that carries. Thank you very much. Do you want to make a comment?
Sure, I would love to. Thank
Certainly.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. On Superintendent Coombs, I'd like to thank you for the good work that you did in completing and presenting the TR Leger review. When we had the opportunity to appoint someone internally to conduct the review, I thought that Superintendent Coombs would be an ideal selection for that work. He's a great experience in secondary education, and also, of course, his role in Safe Schools brings him makes him closely connected to all of our principals and many, many students who have met with challenges over the time. But I want to say also that he did a super job of not going it alone. He worked very closely with Superintendent Mills and Principal Trasick, as well as others in TR Leger, and also engaged a number of principals and vice principals in the review as well. So really, it was a tremendous opportunity to broaden many people's understanding of alternative education in Upper Canada. And so I think we're all better for that. But I guess in particular, I think what Superintendent Coombs did was honor the good work of alternative education in Upper Canada, and also serve as a critical friend as we look toward the future and make improvements for all students in our board. So certainly I want to take this moment to once again thank Superintendent Coombs for that good work.
Thank you. And I also want to say thank you as well. I truly believe that, you know, to measure the heart of any board, you have to look at how they treat their at-risk students, those that are the most vulnerable. And I think TR Leger program is an example of the respect that we have for all of our students and the opportunities that we give for every student that comes through our door to find success. And so, Jeff, I thank you so much. Renee, thank you so much. Tim, and please thank your staff for us. We know how hard they work. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to Information and Technology Service Budget Update. I'm going to turn this over to the Superintendent of System Operations, Jeremy Hobbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to just bring you a brief budget update on the IT work that we've done in 2014-15 and the outlook, the financial outlook for 15-16. In your package, I think I've got I don't know, 15 or so pages of detail, but this is just intended to give you a bit of an overview, especially for new trustees, perhaps who aren't as familiar with the organization. So the IT department consists of two main components, central services and field services, and just to give you a flavor for what we do. In the field group, there's about 12,000 PCs, computers scattered across our 90 sites. We now have over 7,000 personal devices of students that are registered with our BYOD program that are on the network every day. About 2,500 wireless access points, switches, smart boards, projectors, over 900 printers at last count, believe it or not. On the central side, what we do is we take care of the PeopleSoft HR system, financials and payroll from a technical standpoint, PowerSchool student information system, identity management systems, Help Zone, network infrastructure, all the services you use like Office 365, email, Link, eFax, SharePoint, Insight, those kinds of things, and also report card, IEP, and other systems. So an awful big footprint for the group in IT. Some of the challenges that we're facing, as usual over the course of the last 10 years, I think there was approximately 1 minute in 2009 when we had a pretty homogeneous PC environment where all our devices were running Windows 7, and then somebody invented the iPad, and that kind of blew everything up for us. So since that time, we've been grappling with an explosion of devices and form factors and use cases, and so that's been a bit of a challenge to our conventional wisdom. So the strategies we've been working on there are instead of trying to lock down every computer for every student and get everyone on the same device, we're really focused now on getting services to a device, no matter what type of device it is. We're really focused on making things affordable, scalable, manageable, and secure, so we don't want to have any data breaches, and that's a big deal for us. We're working on building an infrastructure to enable personalization. So there's a trend that you may hear if you read it all about IT called consumerization, where back in the old days people would go to work and they would get a computer but they wouldn't have one at home. So they'd work on their computer all day at work, and then when they had to go to buy a computer for home, they'd buy what they had at work. And what you're finding now with this trend of consumerization is it's reversed a little bit. People have their preference for what they use at home, and they want their work environment to reflect that a little bit. So we're building out an infrastructure that enables personalization a little bit to simulate that. And we're also trying to look at what a right-sized device footprint in schools looks like and plan for sustainability. So over the course of my tenure here over the last 10 years with the board, the device footprint is pretty much doubled. There's at least twice as many devices that we have now compared to what there were 10 years ago. Our internet usage as of this year is somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 times as much as it was in 2004. And at the same time, the ministry funds us by enrollment. So even as our technology consumption is exploding, the funding is actually on kind of a downward decline because we're funded by enrollment, which is a bit of a challenge. On the operating, another challenge is staff constraints. So just trying to find qualified personnel in our environment and keep them. We tend to outsource quite a bit, especially development work. We focus internally really on integration, business analysis, and project management, and have a strong focus on growing staff from within. Budget pressure, again, we really are focused on seeking economies, seeking efficiencies, and then reinvesting savings, cash savings in new projects and new value-adding projects. Really a big focus over the last few years on automating tasks that my staff had done in the past, so we actually can save in staff, or we can reallocate staff towards generating value. And again, over the course of the last few years, you've heard mobile and you've heard about the cloud perhaps. Really what we've been doing extensively, especially over the last few years, is instead of maintaining services like email in our own data center, buying servers, all that stuff, we're actually consuming it out of the cloud now. So the analogy might be, there was maybe a time when you know, local municipalities were generating electricity, or you might have had to, you know, generate your own power on site if you were a business, and eventually what happened is you started buying it like a utility. So it just comes to you and you pay a monthly expense, and that tends to be the way we're starting to see IT consumed now, especially for services that are really mature. One of the challenges with cloud is that it's become very easy for almost anybody to throw up a business and sell a web service. And that really makes things interesting for us, because when you're trying to present a coherent front to parents, people can go out and just buy a service and you end up with islands of data. So we're trying to introduce some governance so that we maintain a good service level. And really, for us, it's been a big shift in the IT department towards trying to use a more business case oriented approach to selecting projects, right? So looking at how we're driving value for the organization. Next slide. Some of our key accomplishments for 2014-15, this was a really big year for the IT department, as a lot of projects that were in development for a number of years came to fruition. So that personalization strategy that we talked about at the start of the year, we simplified password strategies to make technology more accessible to younger kids particularly. Did some work around allowing people to change their desktop wallpaper and configure font sizes and those kinds of things to improve accessibility of devices. So when a student sits down at a shared computer in the library, they can set up the computer in a way that works for them, and then they move to another computer somewhere else in the school or in the board, and those settings all follow them now. We've done an admin device replacement, so you guys are all using devices that we've sort of done a refresh on laptops for all principals. So we did a refresh on cell phones as well. So that was somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 devices we rolled out earlier in the year. We rolled out our first mobile app this year, so we rolled out an application called Hall Monitor for principals that allows principals to roam the hall with their cell phone, and they can quickly call up a student and find out what class a student's supposed to be in if they're not in class. So that was something that we've deployed to all our administrators. As you've probably heard, My Family Room, we've rolled phase 1 and phase 2 of that out. So now approaching around 5,000 families that are on that service. Rolled out the MIR 3 emergency mass notification system. So that's intended to get in touch with, does something like 35,000 voice calls in 2 minutes. So if you have to get a message to all our parents or the parents who are registered, we've rolled that out. Migrated 4,000 staff to Office 365. Upgraded the wide area network at 60 sites, so now our students are experiencing between 10 and 100 times the internet speed that they were a year ago. Rolled out BYOD service enhancements and some updates to AirWatch, and as you may be aware, just in the process now of rolling out for the first time a device for every teacher. So every teacher on our board is getting kind of a mini Surface Pro. In partnership with the program department, we're rolling that project out over the course of the next 3 weeks. So been a busy year for us. Next slide. This one's a little bit wordy, but I'll give you the high points. One of the ways we look at the performance of the department over the course of the year is how well we meet our commitments or keep our promises. So really our promises are in the form of projects usually. So how well are we delivering on the projects that we proposed? I mean, the key stat here really is this time last year we had 12 projects that were scheduled to be completed by the end of this school year, and 9 of those are on track to being completed. So doing pretty well in terms of completion rate of projects on the timelines that we've proposed. Next slide, just to give you a sense of what the overall budget project structure is for IT. To keep it really simple, about half of our budget is salaries and benefits of staff. Excuse me, another 43% of that budget is what we call recurring commitments. So those tend to be on an ongoing basis budget that we are expenditures for access to services. So for example, the wide area network that provides connectivity to all our 90 schools is about $1 million a year, essentially. Every time we buy a piece of software like PowerSchool, we have to pay an annual fee to continue to access updates and upgrades for that particular software. So that represents an enormous chunk of our spend. And every time we do a new project like My Family Room, for example, you spend some money to build the service initially, and then on an ongoing basis, you're spending somewhere between 5 and 10% of that initial build cost per year ongoing for ongoing maintenance and support of that as well. So every time we spend something on a project, we spend some budget down, but add to that recurring commitment pie chart. And so that leaves about 8% left for project work. The challenge for us really is twofold. It's not just about picking new projects to do, but it's finding areas within our own organization where we can find savings and doing projects to capture the savings and then reapply the savings to something else. So in the case of the wide area network, for example, even though we're delivering a dramatically improved service level to the average school, the overall contract saves about $100,000 a year. So that money gets repurposed to doing things like My Family Room and supporting My Family Room. Another example is we own a fairly significantly large fiber optic network of our own that we've built over the course of the years. And so when I build fiber optic cable, for example, to TIS, I'm not paying Bell $1,000 a month to connect that. That's a piece of fiber optic cable that we own. So we put a capital investment in and then reap the savings over several years. So we've got about 6 sites that we're planning on doing over the course of the next year to add to that fiber optic network, and the present value of the savings will be about $180,000 over 20 years. So small stuff, but the pennies add up over time. Next slide is, again, I think we're just going to in perpetuity have the homage to Rick Gales. But the intent here is to show you, as I do with facilities, the evolution, and this is in your package, the evolution of our staffing complement. What you'll notice this year is our staffing complement went up by 1. And the reason for that, as you may recall, is for the first time this year we hired a teacher in our department, and her goal really is, actually our goal I should say, as a department, is we've been a little dissatisfied over the last few years, is we've tended to focus on technology projects as being complete once the technology was fully implemented. And so you tend to, it's like a little bit like pushing the bird out of the nest and hoping it flies. And so we've really tried to make an effort now, I think, to getting the kind of behavior we want out of people. So it's not enough just to turn the technology on and say, there you go. We really want to get out to people and get them using it. And you'd see that reflected, I think, in the fact that we've hired this teacher, Tanya Mason, who's been out working with teachers directly in classrooms, helping them use Office 365 and these new devices. You'd also see it in our approach to My Family Room, where we've really spent a lot of time after the project, the technology was turned on and live, to go out and sell it with parents and with school administrators. So that's a campaign you'll see happening. I think that'll reflect a change in approach on most of our projects. The trends that you would see when we increase the FTE, we don't increase the overall budget. So what tends to happen is, this is another case where we want to hire an extra FTE in the department. So the question for us is, where do we find that money without increasing the budget? And so sometimes what that means is we hold off on filling vacancies, or we trade one vacancy for a new position. In other cases, as in the case of the wide area network, we drive our costs down, and so we can repurpose that cost towards bringing that savings towards bringing staff in. In other cases, we take it out of our project budget. But I think, again, the realization for us is it's not about just cranking out projects. It's really about helping the organization achieve the value that we promised by doing the project in the first place. So if you look at this, what you see is, generally what you'd see is salaries and benefits are up a little bit from last year, which really reflects the cost of a teaching staff. Recurring commitments are more or less even from last year, and what you see is project work is down a little bit. So the overall budget for the entire department is down just a little bit, just around $100,000. And does that worry me? Not especially. I mean, it's like I said, with technology, you can always use more money, but what we've become fairly adept, I think, at trying to find savings to deliver on the commitments. And very much like facilities, the capital group, what you really find is that we've got money where we are really lacking is enough people to actually put boots on the ground and do the projects. So sometimes it's not a money problem, it's I don't have enough staff to actually physically execute the project work for us. So we're comfortable. Next slide is the stacked bar graph. So again, just kind of a recapitulation of the data you saw on the previous slide to give you a flavor of what it looks like graphically. And then the next slide is really key project work for 15-16. So what you'll see happening is you'll hear about the cyclical upgrade program, which has been historically a process by which every year we save up some money, and then every few years we buy a large number of devices for the classroom. And as I said, those 12,000 PC devices in the classroom, the oldest ones there are approaching 10 years old, and we need to take about 3,000 of them out and hopefully replace them with something else. So that's whenever you buy a piece of technology, you really have to plan on when it's leaving your environment as well, what the investment's going to be to bring that up to speed. So next year our focus is going to be on classroom devices. We've kicked off a project on enterprise voice. So the idea here is to replace our conventional handset phones that we have with IP-based phones that will be based on our Link system. So we designed that Link system a few years ago with the intention of going that route. We're actually have an RFP on the street for replacement of the website, school websites, and the corporate intranet, which is known as Insight. We're pretty excited about the My Family Room expansion. So on July 17th is the schedule. It'll be the first time we have a full-blown UCDSB mobile app for parents branded with My Family Room that will allow parents to send notes to the school to say my son or daughter is going to be late or absent. July 17th is our project date right now. And that ties in with a larger initiative we're putting in place around attendance. Just to give you a flavor, my staff did a little bit of a time and motion study in a couple of schools over the course of the last few weeks and found 16 person hours per day in a school of 450 students spent on attendance. So just taking in the notes from the parents, taking in the attendance from the teachers, keying it into PowerSchool, calling home. And we think we can really streamline that, which is a savings in terms of time and effort, but it's also, I think, a risk mitigation strategy for the board as well for making those call-outs faster. We're expanding the Hall Monitor app. So I mentioned earlier that mobile app that we worked on with a company out of Montreal for principals and vice principals. We're actually working on developing an attendance taking package for that, so teachers will be able to use their new devices to take attendance by touch in their classroom, which reduces the paper handling. And we have a big elementary report card migration project from the existing legacy system to the new to a new system, which is a bit up in the air given the labor situation, but that's nonetheless that's a big project for us as well. So summary. Basically, the overall technology usage in UCDSB continues to explode. It's remarkable. There was a time a few weeks ago when we flipped over to the new internet circuit, which is on the order of 10 times faster than the previous one, and almost immediately our entire new bandwidth was consumed by kids in grade 7 to 12 using Netflix. I kid you not. We can see that on the internet. So we throttled that down, but it was like it's really interesting to see the kind of behavior you get out there. Project performance for us remains satisfactory, so there's things we want to improve with respect to how we execute projects, but I think we're doing a fairly good job of meeting our commitments. The concerns, I think we have some concerns around sustainability and supportability, particularly of the school device infrastructure. So lots of smart boards out there, but not much of a plan for replacing them. So that's we're trying to figure that out. And just overall budget forecasted to be slightly down, but not in a worrisome way. So I expect us to be able to hopefully deliver some exciting things for you next year.
Thank you so much. Comments, questions? Trustee McAllister and Trustee Carton.
You mentioned the replacement of Insight. Does that include our public website, public board website?
It does.
And the schools will be incorporated into that?
Yep,
or?
everything.
Okay. Just a question with regard to My Family Room. You estimate that it's approximately 10% there now of our families who are registered?
It's actually, we estimate that there are around 17,000 unique families, and 5,000. So one parent, for example, if you have a 2-parent household, we would count that as one family. So what we're looking at is we want families to be represented. So what you tend to find now so far is that usually one or the other parent signs up. We don't see both sign up. So we're sitting around 25-30% of unique families. We were hoping for 40%. That was really what our target was this year, but we're going to keep the press on, and as we expect it to kind of ramp up as we launch the mobile app a little bit again.
Thank you.
Trustee Kartner.
I'm kind of in shock here because back in the 70s, I taught a story to my students that was science fiction. And we're here.
No, you're here.
And I'm here to tell you the story. Can you tell me what iCoach is?
I think that would be Superintendent Allen. Good question.
The iCoach project started with the special ed initiative last fall, where one section was given. We have 4 schools involved: Seaway, Almont, South Grenville, and Perth. And so it's an iCoach section. So the teacher of the section works with the students and teaches them the apps and using the technology. And then the students provide workshops. They go out and help other students in other classes and really develop the technology that way. So we've carried it on. What happened over the course of the year is we also received funding, which I'll talk about in a minute, from the province, and so that let us extend the project. We call it Tech Coach because there could be technology for a number of areas. We have had other schools also come in and be part of it and observe it, and it's really something that we're going to keep moving forward with. It's about the co-learning, really. Kids learning from each other, staff learning from kids, staff learning from staff. It's been a huge success so far, and right now we're involved in a research project as part of this additional funding on it. So we've had parent surveys and student surveys and staff surveys about it, and they're gathering some anecdotal data and a couple pieces of evidence around it.
Thank you.
Mr. Bill McPherson.
Through the chair. 3 short questions. Board docs. Does that fall under your umbrella? No,
sir.
That's a quick answer. Second question. I'm assuming that most of our school sites use Wi-Fi? Okay. I know this is a little bit of a loaded question, but we have had a few parents expressing concerns about the safety of Wi-Fi. How safe is Wi-Fi in your opinion? Those of us who run our own cell phones up to our heads half the time.
Mr. Chair, this may be a bit longer than my first response. I think that the challenge for us is that, because I work in the facilities department, we get, challenges about air quality all the time, for example. In Wi-Fi, in IT, Wi-Fi is one of the unusual cases where people will question the safety of something that we're doing. And I think in all cases, I'm not really qualified to make a judgment about the scientific merits of the safety. So we rely on agencies like Health Canada in this case to sort of make a judgment. What we can do is demonstrate that we're compliant. And so as an example, when in a couple years ago, when we first were sort of exposed to some of the concerns around Wi-Fi, I think it's a legitimate question. I think it's worthwhile for us to take those seriously and say we are compliant with the standards, the prevailing standards of the day. So we brought in the Canadian Radiation Safety Institute, and they went around and measured in schools and found that we were at less than 1% of the Canadian standard. So we're not only are we within the Canadian standard, we're within the most rigorous, strict standards across the globe. So, I mean, to me, that would be my answer, is that I don't make a judgment about the scientific validity of the standard, but I can demonstrate that we comply with it.
Okay, third and final question through the chair. I've always been curious is how does a school board end up owning a fiber optic cable setup? Like, I've had some past experience with Balkan that came through and dug this trench through my farms and sunk a fiber optic cable in my hayfields. How did we come to own our own network, so to speak?
The way we approach it is this is building on something that happened with my predecessor initiated back in 2003, is they started looking at the actual cost, the monthly cost. So for a school, it's like your home. You pay a monthly amount for internet, and we can estimate what the cost is to actually build fiber. And basically what I do is I get a big spool of fiber and I go out at night and run it.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. Anyway.
You're the one that's
No, but we do a cost benefit analysis. So we look at the 20-year cost of buying service versus the cost of building our own fiber. We engage a company. In this case, we're using a company called Expertcom.
Okay.
And there's a whole lot of permitting and routes, and we've tried to go under the canal in Smiths Falls, and right now we're trying. You'll see trucks out there trying to get routes underneath the 401 for us, and we keep going until we get a payback period of less than 20 years on the fiber, and then we decide that that's a site we're going to build.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Anyone on the phone lines? Superintendent Hobbs, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next report is a follow-up from a motion, professional development plan, and I'll turn this over to Superintendent Allen. And this was a motion, just to give you the background, that came out of a motion on January 14, 2015. The committee of the whole direct the director to provide a professional development plan linked to the budget with a report to be brought back to the committee of the whole by May 2015. So I'll turn that over to you.
Great, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So to maintain the standards of excellence in teachers, we know that is a priority, and we want our teachers continually actively engaged in professional development. We know that teachers, from research, we know that teachers have the greatest impact on the achievement of their students, other than any other factor. And second to that are the principals, who have the greatest impact. So professional development of high quality is really important to us, and continually implementing professional development across our system is another important priority for us. The Ministry of Education, of course, recognizes this and helps support this in many disciplines and promotes this excellence in Ontario. In Upper Canada, of course, we've adopted several years ago the professional development plan, where teachers are working collaboratively with others. Research from Michael Fullen and others have tells us that teachers learning in collaboration with colleagues is the most effective professional development and has the highest impact on student achievement, much more so than teachers learning alone or going and attending a presentation. We also know Fullen's research also tells us that teachers need to be actively involved in the professional development, and the train-the-trainer model has not been proven to be effective, which was a past practice that we've used. So we, in our board, have established some very effective and consistent practices across our board where we bring professional development to the school level, have principals, superintendents at the table as part of the professional development, and really have been working to grow that, that model, the hub model, in our schools. When we think about professional development, we need to be thinking about not only engaging the teachers, but also consider the purpose or the intent of the professional development and what is the outcome that we want from that. The ministry helps us in ways as they have helped us identify areas of priority from across the province, and bringing that to our board. Some of the priority initiatives I've listed here, they include early learning in particular, math, of course, pedagogical leadership, which I'll refer to a little later, French, the new teacher induction program, 21st century learning. In most of these programs that I'm talking about today, these are based from EPO grants. The only one that's not, that I've included in the list, is the last one in this slide, which is the Small High School Summit. And the reason I've included that in the whole overall scheme is because it was the discussion around the Small High School Summit where this professional development, the question came about the professional development plan and linked to the budget. So, this is a summary of the professional development portion of EPO grants that have come into our board this year. In their written package, you've received sort of some extensive notes on how that money has been spent in each of the categories. I'll go over a few highlights of them for you. So of course math has been our priority, and you can see that that is the largest portion of our professional development within our school board. We have received funding for a variety of sources through EOSDN, through Collaborative Inquiry into Mathematics, an EPO grant, also building effective instruction in math, and the main portion of this funding comes from the system implementation and monitoring money from the ministry, which is really focused on improving math. And we as system leaders go to training 3 times a year about that with our colleagues from Eastern Ontario. So this is where we implement in every single one of our 64 schools and elementary schools. They are participating in the hub models where 5 math PRTs, and we have a principal and a portion of another principal focused on math. They looking at provincial trends, looking at our own data, and bringing that learning, building the math community in our schools. They have Tuesday hub days, they have a follow-up day at the school, and then a subsequent follow-up later in that same month. So the content, of course, is an intersection of the Ontario curriculum as well as intentional instructional strategies and promoting student thinking. We've also looked at, this year we've looked at patterning and algebra, as that is a main focus from across the province, as well as proportional reasoning of areas of need that need support. The transition pathways and collaborative inquiry in math has been a 7 to 12 focus. It's an EPO grant that has actually funded us in being able to bring together a group of 9 schools that are all working specifically on math work. They've done, it is trying to replicate the elementary model where bringing student work to the table, bringing student voice about learning math and changing instructional practices. It's really, what's been exciting about this initiative is it's really grassroots. We had a couple schools connecting with other schools saying, well, we're doing this in math, and somebody else said, we're doing this in math, and we said, well, we need to bring this all together, and at about the same time we received this funding last fall, so the timing was perfect. We've had a sharing day where the schools have come together, and they had sort of a round table where they showed what they were doing, and the connections continue on. We have, we also have system staff that goes out and supports them in their work at their schools. French is the next area which has been a huge focus in our board, and in some of the numbers in the report that I've given you actually have increased since the time I wrote this report. But we've had 105 grade 7 to 12 teachers involved in hub sessions with the implementation of the new curriculum in both elementary and secondary. French has been a priority in our board. We've also we've enjoyed the opportunity to bring in particular grade 7 to 12 teachers together for French, because they don't tend to get to be able to get together to talk about the instructional strategies that are effective, and so the funding from the ministry has really helped us with that, and as well as the release of the CEFR, which I spoke about in a previous presentation. But those FSL study days have allowed people to look at the teachers to look at the new curriculum, focusing on the oral strategies that they're going to implement in the classroom, and talk about assessment and evaluation in FSL. The majority of our new teachers in our board are FSL teacher, French as a second language teachers. So we have had a lot of training as well, focusing on AIM training. So we've had extensive days for AIM training for the new teachers, and then follow-up refresher days for experienced teachers in the AIM. And so we've tried to organize those, so teachers are learning about the AIM in the morning, and in the afternoon, again, getting to talk about the CEFR, the new document. A lot of differentiation in these workshops, and as I say, have been very well received. We've also had a principal lead team in FSL with 3 administrators, and they are focusing and bringing some of this learning to their FSL colleagues, their colleagues around the board, in instruction and what to look for in good instruction in FSL classrooms. So, and we've had a lot of support from the ministry in this area. The next one on my chart is the Small High School Summit. You had an extensive report on it earlier, but basically just want to highlight, it was 345 not just teachers, but participants from various employee groups, and the overall cost, or the actual cost of running the event, and I know from the previous meeting they highlighted there were additional costs from school funds, is $110,000. It is a large-scale sort of presentation, and it's been well received in the past, and perhaps as I go forward and describe what our plan is for 2015-16, it might not fit into the plan at this time for moving forward. Our cross-curricular literacy hubs have been focused grade 7 to 12, but really they've been focused grade 7, 8, and 9, trying to build that transition. We've used the geography curriculum as the kickoff, but in actual fact, as we've gone across the course of this year, that other content area schools have identified, that's good, but we need to be really looking at this in literacy still. So the EPO grant of $89,000 for that has helped us to be able to do hubs in the secondary schools. Basically, it's once every 3 weeks, and it's grade 7 and 8 and 9 teachers together. And there's been some very exciting learning and practice getting into the classrooms, opening up the classroom doors at those levels, and talking about the documentation of student learning and bringing student voice actually to the table. We've had some real aha moments. We did do some pre-surveys with the teachers, and the plan was to do some post surveys. We might not be able to do that with all of the teachers involved right now, but the idea was the surveys was to talk about what is the change in practice. But I can tell you anecdotally, we've in one particular hub, we had people from the grade 7, 8s, teachers who were at a different school sending resources to the grade 9 and 10 teachers saying, okay, try this, we found this. So you can see the impact of that ongoing learning. They were in the classroom, they knew the kids that the instruction was targeting, and they were looking at new ways of doing it. Another anecdotal example was about halfway through one of the hubs, one of the teachers threw up his hand and says, I have to totally change the way I'm assessing. I've only done paper assessments up till now. I see there's so much more learning happening than just what's being put down on paper and pencil. And the last anecdotal example I'll use, and it applies to many of these areas, was in the cross-curricular literacy hub in Gann Secondary School, and they were talking about student voice and talking about documenting learning, and they kept saying, we don't understand how to do this. So the suggestion was made from the program resource teachers saying, well, maybe we should go over and see how they're doing it in the elementary school. So the whole team went over 3 weeks later and spent time in the elementary classrooms and dialogued with those elementary teachers and learned from them about getting away basically from the paper and pencil assessment and looking at different ways of instruction. Pedagogical documentation pedagogical leadership is a K-3 initiative from the is from the province, and that is focusing on assessment to support student learning. It's used to assess observation, conversation. It is a triangulation of that data: product, conversation, and observation. It is targeted out of the early learning money, but it is applicable to all areas. So we've had 10 targeted schools. We were the only school board who brought to the ministry training, which happened 3 times this year. We're the only school board who brought teams of administrators. And if we wouldn't be in this climate now, actually the ministry was coming next week to observe our work, because they see that being applicable across the province. So the same sort of concept where groups of, in this case, in those 10 schools, the whole primary teams over the course of 5 sessions were released to talk about the learning of the students in the classroom, to explore different assessment practices, and to dig into the curriculum and look at effective instructional strategies. Our NTIP workshops this year, they are workshops for new teachers, and we are funded for that. The teachers get mentorship. There's mentorship money that goes to the school so they can pair up with another teacher in the school. But also this year we tied it into, from the system-wide, looking at the Learning for All. So not only, and we provided 4 different workshops actually, well, a series of 2 and 2 in the East and the West, and so we've received very positive feedback on that, as the teachers, it gave them sort of a baseline and a connection with other teachers, but also we were looking at the differentiation strategies using the special ed document Learning for All and helping these teachers develop differentiation in the classroom, which is a high priority when you're a new teacher. You come into the classroom and say, how do I do this? How do I do this with all these different students in different levels? We're funded from our special ed budget, not our budget, from the ministry on autism training. We've run a number of sessions. We had 2 full sessions with the LRC and LRTs over the course of the year, but we've also run a number of very effective after-school workshops with this, in the series of workshops where teachers came and learned more about this strategy. I won't go heavily into the IEP or Empower training, but both funded from the ministry. You've heard about these in previous presentations. I will talk a bit about the 21st century learning, although I've sort of spoken about it with the iCoach. So we have the iCoach project has morphed into the Tech Coach project. The 21st Century Learning funding is in its 3rd year, about to go into its 4th year. This year there's a professional development component. There's a research component, which I alluded to, and then there's a device acquisition piece of it. And so we're working with IT to get devices in teachers' hands so that they can use it in the classroom and help support student learning. So the descriptions of all these initiatives throughout a board is they've really enhanced our professional development across the system. And we also had families and schools who, with their family schools money, have also organized to have speakers come in. A number of our schools have had Damien Cooper, who's a researcher, came in to talk about assessment. And it ties in beautifully with a number of the initiatives that we've developed from the system level. So what are our next steps in professional development? We definitely see the importance of the differentiation based on the school need. The professional development needs to be targeted to the school-generated goals. To date, up until this date, although the hub work has been valuable, it has opened classroom doors, it has got teachers talking about their practice and talking about student learning, we see that it's a similar process across the board, and our schools have differentiated needs. So that's what we mean about that. And the system, we as a system, therefore, need to be supporting the school goals instead of we as a system determining the school goals. And so that's where we see the differentiation coming in moving forward. So how do we target this? Well, by the development of a SIPSA and a BIPSA plan, we are going to we are currently digging deep into what are our needs assessment, what are the emerging and urgent learning needs that we are gaining from this data, what are the strategies that we're going to put in place, and how are we going to monitor them. So by setting a goal and then if-then statement of what's our theory of action towards that, then we will be able to measure the progress as we move along in these goals. So to support that, our view to move forward is to have schools will have school-based learning teams similar to hubs, but they'll be organized and designed at the school levels. The funding that we provide through the EPO grants will be distributed out to schools based on their design of what they need for their release time. It will be measured, of course, and those school learning teams take place, and every teacher would be involved in a school learning team. In many cases, that is already happening, because even though they have the hubs, in lots of cases, school-based funds are used to release teachers on different learning teams in their schools, or we used to call them PLCs. That would be supported by school partnership teams, by the senior team having a look and going over the SIPSA plans over the course of the summer. At the end of June, we'll be able to identify people that are working on like goals. It's similar to what I described in the TCPI initiative from before, so that there's still that opportunity to partner with other schools if you're working on similar work. And there's lots of value in that, especially if you're working in clusters or small families of schools, and you're the only secondary school, let's say, in that cluster. And that's how the TCPI developed. We're looking at another level of presentations with learning cafes for educators. So when there are specific skills, like perhaps we have teachers who don't know how to do running records, well then we'll offer cafes in different places across the board what people can voluntarily sign up for and be able to learn those skills over a series of a couple workshops. In the written report you see a whole list, and that was a brainstorm session that we had earlier this year of some of the topics that might be covered, and actually we could have gone on forever. We have a lot more ideas there. And then the learning modules. Dave Coombs is working on a leadership plan, so there'll be learning modules for leaders. There may be learning modules for EAs or office admins. So that's another whole level, not specifically or particularly supported perhaps by the EPO grants, but that it just shows that we're being very intentional and very designed about the professional development that we're bringing to the schools. So again, the school-based model, where we have learning partners working and supporting small clusters of 4 to 6 schools, and working alongside classroom teachers, helping to build that continuum within the school, and the school goals supported by the system staff, not the system designing the school goal, basically. So I've also provided for you up until this was as of last week, and I know yesterday we just got French funding. So this is the EPO grants that we know at this point that are available for PD. It's the total looks significantly lower than the total on the pie graph that you saw earlier, but there's a couple areas that I'd like to highlight on that. One is there is no French funding in this yet, and that just, as I said, just arrived yesterday. The early years funding has significantly gone down since, if we were to back up 3 years ago, we had very significant early years funding. The first few years, the funding was to get the full day kindergarten initiative up and rolling, and then about 3 years ago, they put a lot of money into the PD and the for that, and now that it's fully implemented, the understanding and intention are that it is part of our practice and what we do. So the external funding is no longer there. Most of the other areas are quite similar, but there, like I said, there are some that may still come into us that we're not aware of. So we really think that this intentional design will support learning in our classrooms, and having SIPSA plans that will help us measure the goal and the work in our schools, and have the PD support that. It will bring us great results as we move forward.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to just pass the chair over to you, so I can ask a question. When we often hear in our discussion when we're dealing with our students with high needs, they are included in our classrooms. And we often hear that the teachers have the capacity to deal with these students in Tier 1 intervention. Where, I don't see it here, and maybe it comes under student success, building capacity for differentiation, but I don't see it as the same thing. How do we build capacity in our teachers through professional development to have those Tier 1 intervention skills to deal with these students that we have included in our classrooms?
Part of the, as I described about the learning for all, that's part of it. And we also, through our learning resource coaches who are in our schools, they're special ed teachers in our schools, and when that role was designed, the purpose of that was to work in collaboration with the teachers. Over the course of time, sometimes that has shifted a little bit away and focused on some of the administrative tasks within special education, and that is one of the messages that we've been sending back out as we plan to move forward, is the enhancement of that role once again. Really, we would love all teachers to have special ed part 1 no matter what classroom they're in. So that's part of it, that professional training that way. But also learning with colleagues in the classroom is one of the biggest success factors, and the learning resource coach within the school or learning resource teacher in the secondary school are great advocates for that, because they are highly skilled in those areas.
Follow up? I'm not used to this, but I like it.
A little bit more.
So, as I said earlier, it's the ministry really is assuming that all teachers have that capacity because we now integrate our students into the classroom. So it sounds to me like it's not specifically targeted as a skill set that we want to give to our teachers. We just sort of let them do it ad hoc in the school through the learning, through someone else. And I'll be honest, I'm uncomfortable with that, because really it doesn't really come down necessarily to me to have part 1 in special education, but be able to have the capacity to deal with all of those students that our community assumes our teachers have.
In response, through you, Chair?
Yes.
Vice Chair? I recognize what you're saying, but I do think in the past, the training that system staff in special ed have been able to provide and the learning partners moving forward, these are exceptional teachers who have exceptional training, and their ability to go in and work alongside the teachers in the classroom. You will have a variety of experience in your teaching staff in a school, so they will be able to work alongside those who need to build those skills.
Thank you.
Okay. May I just follow up in that regard?
Yes, Director.
Thank you. I note in your report, Superintendent Allen, that you referenced the learning cafes for educators, and I think earlier you mentioned this was sort of a brainstorming of ideas, but I can also see where there could be, and some of the topics listed are exactly that, supports for Tier 1 interventions, and so perhaps this list is not a complete list, and there may be other topics as well, but I can very well see that this would be the kind of thing that many teachers, whether they be new or more experienced, would like to tap into so that they can support all learners in their classrooms.
Right.
Trustee Cram?
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up from Director Patterson's comment, have we done any thinking, investigating as to e-learning for those particular type of topics that the Director was talking about that our staff may take advantage of?
Through you, Chair, Vice Chair. Yes, we have. We are looking at the link system that Jeremy spoke about is a very practical way to provide training within, actually we just did one this afternoon with all of our elementary principals, because we can share resources, they can see it on the screen, and everybody also there's a note board that they can write messages or questions back and forth, and there's also the audio part. So yes, we can provide some of this training at the school, and the other thing about using the link resources is that people can cluster. Not today, but other days, we've had even families of schools get together, so they're together in a site, and then other families together in a site, and we're all connected by link. So yes, to try and avoid the travel and optimize our training time. There will be some things that need to be face-to-face, however.
Paul?
Supplemental, Chair. Have we done any individual e-learnings where the teachers could be at home and have a learning module that they could pull up on their screen at 8:30 at night and go through a particular topic, just like a student can do an e-learning course?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We haven't developed that yet from our perspective, but from the ministry, there's a site called EduGains, and there's another site called Teach, Learn, Lead, and there are many resources, videos, modules, that sort of thing there, and then that's on the program side, I'll call it, and there's similar resources available on the education side. But it definitely is something that we would look to develop because we want consistent practice within our board.
Trustee Wendy McPherson.
Thank you. Thank you, Valerie, for that. And I'm just going to go a bit further with what Trustee Cran said. Part of being a mom and listening to other moms and parents, which is great that we're getting our teachers trained and everything, but my biggest complaint is that you're taking our teachers out of their classroom to be teaching our kids. Is there any way that we are using maybe more of the technology that we have here today, that they could be calling in and being still participating, but without having to really remove them from the school for the day?
Through you, Chair. Through you, Chair, sorry. Part of this model, part of the value of this model is that it is school-based. And to be quite honest, the most effective professional development and learning teams happen in half a day, not in a full day. When we bring them together centrally, takes the travel time and all that sort of thing. So a lot of the school-based learning teams are happening in half a day, and actually they're going back into the classroom. So this collaboration piece That's part of it. The other piece of that is with learning partners with the LRC, they're learning in the classrooms. If I can use the example of the 21st century learning, that PD was happening in the classrooms with kids at the same time. So it wasn't go away and learn about, take 3 days, go and learn about this. No, it was there. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, just be sensitive to it, that parents are out there seeing that we're, she's gone again, that kind of thing.
Right.
If I can follow up with one last question. So am I to understand correctly that you are looking at other possibilities for the small school summits or the small high school summit?
I think at this point in time, if we're using system funds, I think we need to be promoting the school-based model at this time. There are still, the Small High School Summit is on a PA day, and that is a day when, if schools are developing their plans and working towards that, I think that there's real value to have school staffs together working on that. It doesn't mean that the sharing of workshops that people have to offer can't still be offered in that cafe model, which is, lots of those would probably be an after school or online sort of training. So I
only asked that question because after our presentation back in February, I was out asking the question, how do you feel that some small school summit is serving us? And nobody was very enthusiastic.
Okay.
Other than to say that it was nice to have, where they got ideas for speakers.
Right.
So,
well, we think we can still accomplish that in other ways. So,
thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to.
Yep. Trustee Cartner.
Thank you, Chair. I was just looking at the items that you have received the budgets for the EPO grants.
Right.
Have they cut out NTIP, new teacher induction?
No, it just hasn't arrived.
Hasn't arrived yet?
No, just
okay,
hasn't.
Good.
Trustee McAllister.
Comment and a question. With regard to the next steps in professional development, I applaud the school-based professional development in every facet here, and I think that that's where the action should be pursuant to what Trustee McPherson has said too. Secondly, when we go back to the chart, the pie chart there, my rough math tells me that we spent approximately $2.6 million on PD.
Right.
And since this is a link to this coming year's budget, I don't see any forecast, any budget.
This 2.6 million is generated from the EPO grants. Is that what you're?
Yeah,
sorry.
I guess. I just want to know what the budget's going to be for PD for next year.
It will be based on what we get from the EPO grants, which is what's coming in now. So to date, we received what's on the board. So I'm anticipating around 2 million by the time we're done. NTIP's not in there, French isn't in there yet. So we know there will be a decrease, and the biggest decrease is going to come from the early years. That's a significant decrease from past years. But the others, we expect them to be about the same. So that's our plan moving forward, is about this amount of money.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Bill McPherson.
Okay, through the chair. See if I can get this worded properly. First off, we're looking at a significant decrease in provincial funding for professional development. So I'm going to ask a question about the Small High School Summit. That is the only one on the list that the funding for it came out of GSNs. And I am assuming that it came through school budgets as a means of funding that program. Given that it occurred, past tense, on a PA day, is there an opportunity, or is there a line within the school budgets to allow for professional development on a school-based event? Like, in other words, could each principal, does he have this 110,000, does that show up for professional development on school budgets, or is that a discretional amount included in his budgets?
I think there's two. I think you've got two questions there. The first, can you address the first one? Because Trustee McPherson kind of alluded to the fact that there'd be a huge decrease. Is there going to be, in your opinion, a huge decrease?
Through you, Chair. No, my anticipation is that we will receive, in all the areas that I've outlined, we will receive fairly similar funding, if not the same funding, except for the early learning fund. So that's where the decrease is going to be for professional development. And through you, Chair, for the second part of that, so the $110,000 that supported the Small High School Summit, that was from the General Board GSN fund. And then in the discussion at your last meeting in January, there was discussion about what else supported that. There was probably release time and things, PD time from the schools to also support that, because they'd have to pay registrations and rooms and things like that. So that answers sort of your question. Is there funds for that at the school? Yes, the school does have some funds in their overall budget that they can allocate to PD. They already do it outside of, like, we are funding specific training with this funds, but schools are still having learning teams because they've decided to put money out of their school budget into that. And that is something we're going to strongly encourage next year.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee McAllister.
The Small School Summit is a recurring theme. I just want to go on record that I think that our focus being on school-based learning and school-based professional development, that I think that money is better spent in that regard. That's just my personal opinion.
And I believe, really, when we think back on the motion was to put that in your lap and say, is it the best use of money? Are there other ways? Okay.
Do you want me to respond to
Yes.
that?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to go over, I think it was Trustee McAllister who asked the question about the overall PD budget, and it looks to be over $2 million in essence, and we are aware of $719,000 in EPO grants now. So there's a balance, an offset of at least $1.5 million that we don't know whether we're going to get, in the hopes that we do get it. So I have difficulty in preparing a budget in the hope that we get money, and then we start to deliver PD and the money doesn't come. That's a huge concern that I have at this point, especially when we're talking over $1 million. The second piece is that if this is a budget that's based on the 2015-16 school year, and I think you've heard my colleagues speaking about the Small School Summit, I think we need to make sure that if the Small School Summit is not likely to happen, it needs to be removed from the report to indicate that in the 2015-2016 school year, there is not an allocation of money for a Small School Summit. And just on that bandwagon for a second, I want to make sure I set the record straight. The report that was provided for the Small School Summit had $110,000, but we did learn that there were other figures that were not included in the report, and some of those figures were mileage to the event from schools, registration from the schools, those types of things. So that cost, I believe, is significantly more than $110,000. Now, having said that, if we are performing PD for our teaching staff based solely on EPO grants, that means that we are spending less than 1% of our budget on PD for our teaching staff. We also have a significant amount of staff that are not in the classroom. We have principals, we have SOs, we have QP staff, and we have other non-union staff. I think it's important for us as we move forward and as we prepare the budget to understand what the PD is associated to for principals, superintendents, QP staff, and non-union staff. We need to understand what the money is being used for and whether we are getting a return on our investment or an expected return based on the PD that's being provided. So, Mr. Chair, if the discussion is over, I would like to include a motion at the end to ensure that we get further information on other departments as we move forward. And I need clarification on the budget for PD based on hoping that we get EPO grants.
Okay, thank you. I'm just, yeah, I'm just looking back on the original motion. It doesn't mention teachers specifically. Okay, yeah, I'm just looking at, and I'll just come back to your point in a second here, Trustee McDonald. I'm just looking at the original motion, and I think when at that point in time there may have been some clarification as to whether we were specifically talking about teacher professional development. And if that was the case that came out of that clarification, and I don't have that in front of me, then I can understand why the report just focused in on that. The Management Council? Okay. All right, so.
And Mr. Chair, I'm fine with the report as it is. I think we do need to get the further information.
Yep,
I think this addresses the conversation that we did have at Management Council. But what my concern is the 1.4 million that's not funded through EPO now.
Okay.
And the less than 1% we're spending on teachers for PD.
Okay, so you want to bring forward a motion? We didn't get that typed down yet, I don't believe. But, pardon me?
Well, if Superintendent Allen could address those 2 points, and then I would put a motion forward that we get further information for other employee groups on PD down the road.
Okay.
Perhaps before Superintendent Allen speaks, I could.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to ask the director to speak for a second.
So first of all, in many discussions that we've had regarding the model of professional development and our desire to move to a school-based model, which we understand through research is the most effective way of delivering professional development, embedded PD, we have come to the realization, given our current context, that the Small School Summit is not serving that need. So inasmuch as we had very successful events over the last number of years, it's not consistent with the model of professional development that we would like to deliver for our teachers and for other employee groups as well. And so certainly it is not included in the 2015-16 budget from our point of view, I don't see it listed in the it was listed in the 14-15 report that Superintendent Allen presented, but it's not included in the plan for 15-16.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
I can just address, Chair,
Okay.
one of the questions, in terms of the EPOs we're hoping to get. We have had commitments from the ministry to get them. We know there's a 3-year commitment for French planning. We know there's ongoing NTIP. We just don't know the exact dollars and cents, so that's why they're not listed here, but we do know they're coming up.
Trustee McDonald?
I get that. I understand that we're waiting for the EPO grants, but what if the EPO grants come in slightly different than what the cost of the PD is? If we deliver the PD over the first 6 months of the school year with the majority of that expense, and then all of a sudden we see the EPO grants come in February or March, and the figures are different, I think it's a very dangerous way. I mean, EPO grants are those money bombs that we see. I mean, they come in through the course of the year. They're not released at the same time as DSNs, and I understand that. But if we build a PD plan on money that we think we're going to get, and we don't get it, we are having to find the money elsewhere. It's a very dangerous game to play on our budget, especially when it's over $1 million.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, do you want to bring forward a motion at this point? And I'll read out what I think you have, and then I'm just going to ask you to clarify it. Are you okay with that?
Yep, that's good. Yep.
Okay, that the Upper Canada District School Board direct the director to provide a report to include additional information regarding the professional development budget for 2015-2016 year for the various departments, including but not limited to principals, vice principals, superintendents. Is there more?
And trustees, can we add that?
Well, that's not out of the director's budget or out of the.
We're not going down that path on this one right now.
But I think we could include the non-union and CUPE staff.
And non-union?
Yeah. Can I put a however in there, Chair?
You can try.
No, not so much in the motion. I think it's important that we understand that. But as we move to this, to try and achieve a budget by the end of the school year, we need to make sure that the money that we are putting into PD around student achievement, and I would suspect that there's a portion of that that's QP. Yep. There's a teacher is a portion of that. Principal and NSOs is part of the student achievement. Maybe somewhat indirect. Okay. As it relates to teachers, but we need to have that information, I think, all right, before we have the budget approved.
Trustee McDonald, let me read this out then, and because I think we've got including but not limited to, I think it'll cover it, and then I'm going to turn to the director and ask if it's clear. So that the Upper Canada District School Board direct the director to provide a report to include additional information regarding the professional development budget for the 2015-2016 year for the various departments, including but not limited to principals, vice principals, superintendents, non-union, and all employee groups.
Yeah, that's good.
Is that clear?
Yes, I believe so.
Just want to make sure. Okay, do I have a mover? Or obviously, Trustee McDonald moved.
I move that, yep.
I'll second.
Trustee Karkner, any comments or questions on the motion? Okay, I'll ask you to cast your vote then, please.
Yeah, when?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. We want that report back to us.
June 17th.
Well, we needed to have it. We need to have some of that information as part of the budget discussion. So,
okay, by June
17th. Yeah.
Okay, that's been added. So the Upper Canada District School Board direct the director to provide a report to include additional information regarding professional development budget of 2015-16 year for the various departments, including but not limited to principals, vice principals, superintendents, non-union, and all employee groups by June 17th, 2015. Ask you to cast your votes, please.
My little motion doesn't have the date on it. Is that okay?
Yep.
Should it have it? Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, trying to. Oh, you changed it again. Okay.
And that carries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, actually I'll get this in. The next item is the standing item that we have in terms of the selection and recruitment of the Director of Education. There's not much to report right now. The next stage right now is in the hands of Prometheus. They are creating the ad that will go to Code and OPSOA. That'll be the initial placement of the ad. The ad is very similar, if not exact, with the exception of some numbers in terms of budget and so on. Budget in terms of our overall budget that you saw in your package. The other key dates that have been set would be August 21st and 28th. The search committee is going to sit down with myself and Aaron Guthrow and probably Jordine Lytle at that time to present us a long list, which will come out of a series of interviews that they will be conducting on their end as part of their job. And then we will be interviewing on August the 28th. And that'll be an all-day thing. It'll probably take us from about 9 o'clock to 5 to interview the short list. And I need to stress that two things. Number one, that you must be here in person for the interviews, and you must be here for all of them. It simply is not fair to come into half of the interviews. You've got to be here for every interview. So if you feel that that's a commitment you can't make, you need to let me know. But that's the date, August 28th. Okay, any comments or questions on that?
How many interviews do you think we're having again?
We're not sure what the short list is. Probably 3 to 5, probably 5. But I'm just saying that off the top of my head. Turn this over now to Chair of the SEAC, Trustee Bill McPherson. Oh, I need a motion, sorry, because I know this is going to extend. A motion to extend. Trustee McDonald, do you have a long report?
You went to sleep.
Probably not. Okay.
I don't have, sorry, you were on mute. I don't have anything to report, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So I need a motion to extend 10 minutes. Does that give you enough time?
I hope so.
Okay, Trustee Cram, seconded by Trustee McAllister. Just a show of hands. Thank you very much. Those on the phone, anyone opposed? Thank you. Okay, SEAC Chair. Trustee Bill McPherson, report from SEAC.
Okay, we held our last meeting, second last meeting on May 5th in the boardroom here. Superintendent of Business Barclay gave us the great news on the grants for student needs and other funding and revenue related to spec ed. There's going to be a significant drop in spec ed funding this year. Overall in our budget, the first run through is roughly $4.5 million decrease, which is creating its own issues. What they're trying to do provincially is level the playing field on certain areas of funding, and because we've been so successful, we are now paying the price because we're coming down. It was indicated that this restructuring is occurring due to declining funding. Well, this is from Superintendent Allen, that we will do our best to have a minimal impact on the classroom, keeping student learning as the focus and making sure the staff supports are in place to a limited area number of schools. Thereby, this is where these school partners come in. The committee has decided to forward a recommendation to the Board of Trustees, and you can deal with this as you see fit. Moved by Kathy Blair, seconded by Kevin Brisson, that SEAC recommends to the Board of Trustees that they consider all avenues and envelopes to alleviate the significant shortfall in the projected special education funding for 2015-2016. Just let me move down on the screen here. We also decided to have a special meeting based entirely upon the funding model and the change in the spec ed program, and that meeting was held last night here. We also had a presentation that evening from Carol Lynn Rubino talking about her student journey. Carol Lynn was a handicapped student. She'd suffered a brain injury at a very early age, and she has now graduated from a Brockville-based school, I believe, TIS, and she's heading off to a local college. We had a brief report on the SEAC conference in Toronto, and believe it or not, the ministry presented to the SEAC committees a certificate. Not sure what it was for, but we got it anyway. We also started upon the review of our spec ed plan. We made sure everyone got a copy last night, and we sent them home with their homework. And we will meet again next week on Tuesday night, where it is hoped that we will see the actual dollars for the spec ed funding for next year. So that, in a nutshell, is my report.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions? There was a SEAC as an advisory board. None of this, or advisory committee, none of this came a recommendation by Kathy Blair and Kevin Brisson that the SEAC committee recommend to the Board of Trustees that they consider all avenues and envelopes to alleviate the significant shortfall in the projected special education funding for 2015 and 2016. Opening it up for comments or suggestions what you would like us to do as a board with this. Trustee Cartner and then Trustee Winnie McPherson.
Through you, Chair, I believe that we have asked our senior staff to do just that, is to look at where savings can be made that does not affect the children in the classroom, students in the classroom, and I believe they are doing just that. And hopefully will be reflected on the presentation they receive next week.
Trustee Winnie McPherson.
One of the things also was we were just kind of there's going to be a letter coming to, hopefully they're working on it, and the members are, and they're addressing it to the ministry.
Thank you. Trustee Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Tied with it, and I'm not sure how I would bring it into the agenda except through this particular committee right now. Seeing we have to do pass a budget on our June 17th meeting, I certainly would like to see the figures before June 17th. And I would hope that our next meeting next Wednesday, on June the 3rd, that we could have a budget prepared for us to peruse on June the 3rd so that we have time to digest it and have comment on June 17th.
We will discuss that in Management Council tomorrow. We will get back to you. Thank you very much for that. Any other comments in terms of the recommendation from Kathy Blair and Kevin Grusin?
I think, Chair, since we have received a motion from SEAC, we should acknowledge the motion. A, in terms of the fact that it was considered, B, that steps are being taken, as Trustee Karkner alluded to, and that we will be sharing with them the final results of our budget discussions, which hopefully will satisfy their interests and requests.
I agree with that. Do we do that in the form of a motion? Sure. Or just acknowledge it?
I would just acknowledge it.
Okay, it's documented? Okay. Seth, you okay?
Yeah. Well, we indicated to the committee last night that the process had already begun.
Yeah.
And,
but I think it's important to repeat what Trustee Karkner said, that we had already basically set that mandate in earlier discussions, that we have the same similar concerns.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that.
The big concern that was expressed last night is that without any reduction, over 50% of the anticipated shortfall was going to come out of basically about 12% of the budget. And it was also going to affect our most vulnerable students.
Okay. I thank you very much for that report from SEAC, and we certainly take that recommendation very seriously. Okay. Director, do you have any comments?
I have two comments that I'd like to make. First of all, I received an email today letting us know that Gavin Bergeron, who's a student at Rockland District High School, was contacted by the Right Honorable Paul Martin and asked to read the his closing statement at the Truth and Reconciliation Conference on June the 1st. So Gavin is, as I said, a student at Rockland High School, and he represents FNMI. He is an elected representative of the FNMI leadership group. And Principal Jeff Campbell writes that we're all very proud of Gavin's outstanding work this year, and that it's great news. So that's a very special thing. That's on June the 1st, Monday. So there'll be more to come on that. And secondly, just a reminder or an announcement that our Champions for Kids golf tournament is scheduled on June the 30th, which is a Tuesday. It's going to be at the Upper Canada Golf Club down near Morrisburg. And this is a signature event for the Champions for Kids Foundation. And it's one of our major fundraisers, and we certainly welcome and encourage as many golfers to come out and join us for that day. That's my information there.
Trustee Garrow?
Trustee Garrow, either.
Yes, Trustee Garrow.
Yeah, I just thank you for that. I just wanted to add that there's going to be a walk from Gatineau on May 31st to Ottawa, across the bridge to Ottawa for the Truth and Reconciliation.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, I sent a notice to Lisa on it, I think.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to, I don't have too many remarks, other than just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I want to do a special thank you to Trustee Armour. I noticed when I looked at him with the neck brace, he was in significant pain, and when he sneezed that one moment, I knew he had to go home. because the pain was, but I certainly applaud the fact that he made the effort to be here, so thank you so much. Safe travels, everyone.